My name is Naomi Anderson. I am 34 years old, and I run my own accounting firm in Omaha, Nebraska. 2 weeks ago, I sat at the head of my patio table staring down at a freshly printed quitclaim deed resting on the tempered glass. The late summer air felt thick and hot-heavy with the smell of hickory smoke and the unspoken tension radiating from the 20 relatives gathered in my backyard. My father, Richard, stood at the opposite end of the table. He tapped the crystal face of his wristwatch. The sharp metallic clink cut right through the sudden silence. "Your sister is pregnant and needs the space," he announced. His voice carried the practiced, unyielding tone of a man who expected immediate compliance. He slid a silver ballpoint pen across the glass until it stopped mere inches from my hand. "Sign the house over to Jessica in the next 10 minutes, or do not ever call us Mom and Dad again." The extended family, aunts, uncles, and cousins, who had happily eaten the brisket I bought and drank the wine I poured, held their breath. No one intervened. They simply stared down at their paper plates, conditioned by decades of watching Richard lay down the law. Near the grill, my 30-year-old sister Jessica stood holding a plastic cup of lemonade. She offered a tight, sympathetic smile that did not reach her eyes. Her fingers casually jingled a shiny new set of spare keys to my front door, keys she had copied without asking. They thought they had me cornered. In their minds, I remained the obedient, eager-to-please scapegoat who would fold under the crushing weight of public humiliation. Richard believed the sheer terror of being formally disowned in front of the entire Anderson clan would force me into submission. He relied on the illusion of familial obligation, the unwritten contract demanding I sacrifice my stability for their comfort. What Richard did not know was that I had spent the past 3 months meticulously building a federal case against him. I looked at the pen resting near my fingertips. I looked up at my parents' expectant faces, at Jessica's feigned innocence at the beautiful 4-bedroom sanctuary I had paid for with years of 80-hour work weeks. My pulse beat in a slow, steady rhythm against my throat. Then I smiled. It was not a smile of surrender. I unclasped the brass locks of my leather briefcase sitting on the chair beside me. The metallic snap echoed across the silent patio. I bypassed the quitclaim deed entirely. Instead, I reached inside and retrieved a different legal document, a formal, legally binding 30-day eviction notice. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled my family toxic empire in front of everyone they sought to impress, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Morning Revenge, but only if this story speaks to you. Drop a comment and let me know how old you are and where you are watching from today. Now let me take you back to the exact moment I realized my blood relatives were plotting against me. The eviction notice sat on the tempered glass of the patio table. The silence stretched across the yard. My father stared at the formal paper like it was a foreign object. His jaw clenched tight. He could not comprehend defiance. To understand the sheer audacity of this man demanding the keys to my hard-earned home, you have to understand the toxic soil in which he planted our family roots. I was always the reliable workhorse. Jessica was the pampered show pony. The rules were established long before I ever had a chance to fight back. The defining moment of my life happened when I was 18 years old. That was the exact second the illusion of parental protection shattered. I remember sitting at the scratched laminate kitchen table in my childhood home. The summer heat pressed against the window panes, making the air feel stifling and thin. I held a tri-fold bank statement in my shaking hands. My grandfather, a practical man who valued education over everything else, had left me a dedicated college fund. It was meant to ensure I could get my accounting degree from the University of Nebraska without drowning in debt. I knew the balance by heart. It was my ticket out, my safety net. But as my eyes scanned the black ink on that crisp white paper, my stomach dropped into a bottomless freefall. The balance line read 0. I confronted my parents in the living room. My father sat in his recliner watching a baseball game on television. My mother sat on the sofa meticulously clipping grocery coupons with a pair of silver scissors. They did not flinch. They did not even have the decency to look guilty when I held up the empty statement. Jessica, who was 20 at the time, had managed to rack up an astronomical amount of credit card debt. She spent her days browsing high-end boutiques, buying designer handbags, scheduling weekend spa retreats, and ordering expensive dinners. When the collection agencies started calling the house, my parents panicked. They could not bear to see their golden child face a single uncomfortable consequence. So my father walked into the local bank branch, presented his guardianship papers because I was just weeks shy of my 18th birthday, and drained my entire future to bail her out. He wiped out my grandfather's gift in one single transaction to pay for my sister's reckless shopping sprees. When I stood there crying, holding the empty bank statement, my mother did not offer an apology. She did not express a single ounce of regret. She simply folded a coupon, set it on the coffee table, and sighed. She looked at me with cold indifference and said, "You are smart, Naomi. You will figure it out." So I figured it out. I packed my cheap duffel bag and moved to Lincoln. I signed student loan documents that hung around my neck like heavy iron chains. To survive and pay for my textbooks, I worked 3 grueling jobs. I woke up at 4 in the morning to open a campus coffee shop serving complicated lattes to students whose parents paid their rent. The smell of roasted beans and scalded milk sank permanently into my skin. After a full day of demanding accounting classes, I worked the reception desk at the university library. I sat under harsh fluorescent lights, crunching numbers and studying tax law until midnight, fighting a constant physical ache behind my eyes. On weekends, I scrubbed toilets and vacuumed floors for a local commercial cleaning service. I slept 4 hours a night. I existed on a diet of cheap ramen noodles and stale bagels. I remember walking across the frozen campus during the harsh Nebraska winters, wearing a thin coat and winter boots with worn-out soles. I could feel the freezing snow seeping through my socks, numbing my toes. I was exhausted down to my very marrow, but every time my body wanted to quit, I pictured my father casually handing my grandfather's money to Jessica. That image fueled my determination. My rage kept me awake. I graduated with high honors. I earned my CPA license on my first attempt. While I was fighting for my survival, Jessica continued her pampered existence. She eventually married Brad. Brad was a man who wore tailored suits he could not afford and spoke loudly about his vast networking connections. He styled his hair with expensive pomade and wore a heavy cologne that lingered in the room long after he left. Brad considered himself an entrepreneur, which was just a polite way of saying he refused to work a real job. He bounced from one failed startup idea to another, always needing seed money. At family dinners, Brad and Jessica would order imported steaks and expensive wine, then slide the heavy bill toward my father without a second thought. They were a perfect match, 2 beautiful, empty vessels content to live entirely off my parents' enabling wallets. I accepted my role as the scapegoat early on. I realized that waiting for their validation was a waste of precious time. I channeled every ounce of my energy into building my own empire. I rented a tiny, windowless office above a noisy bakery. The relentless heat from their ovens radiated through my floorboards while I filed tax returns and built my client list. I treated every client with precision and respect. Slowly, my reputation grew in the Omaha business community. The tiny office turned into a leased commercial space. A solo operation turned into a thriving firm with a dedicated staff of 12 professionals. I built a beautiful, independent life from the mud they left me in. But a strange thing happens when the family scapegoat becomes the most successful person in the room. My parents could not stand my autonomy. When they looked at my tailored clothes, my upgraded vehicle, and my growing business, they did not feel pride. Their eyes held a cold, calculating glint. They began to view my hard-earned assets as a community pool. They felt entitled to my success because they shared my DNA. If Jessica needed something, they expected me to simply open my checkbook and provide it. I refused every single time. My boundaries infuriated them. They hated that they could no longer control me through financial dependence. I thought my financial independence would create a permanent fortress around my life. I believed that buying my own property would finally give me a sanctuary they could not touch. I spent months searching for the perfect home, a place where I could breathe without the weight of their expectations. I found a stunning 4-bedroom property in a quiet Omaha suburb. It was my trophy, a physical manifestation of everything I had built alone. I designed a massive home office and paid for custom oak bookshelves. I thought I had finally won my peace. But I underestimated their relentless appetite. I thought they just wanted my money. I had no idea they wanted to invade my actual sanctuary. The real nightmare began just weeks after I closed on my dream home. I was sitting in my new living room enjoying the quiet evening when a heavy knock echoed through the hallway. I opened my front door to find my parents standing on my porch, surrounded by large suitcases. And that is when the silent war for my home truly began. I stood in the doorway, staring at the matching set of heavy leather suitcases resting on my welcome mat. The cool evening breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass from my pristine lawn, but the sudden knot in my stomach overpowered the tranquility. My mother, Brenda, wore an expression of exaggerated distress, clutching her designer purse to her chest. Beside her, my father, Richard, stood with his arms crossed, radiating impatient authority. "A major pipe burst in the master bathroom," he announced, pushing past me into the foyer without waiting for an invitation. "The contractors say the drywall is ruined. We are moving into your guest house until the repairs are finished." He did not ask. He dictated a change to my life as if my property belonged to his personal real estate portfolio. I looked at my mother. She offered a fragile, trembling smile. "Just for a few weeks, Naomi," she said softly. "We have nowhere else to go." I hesitated. By age 33, I had finally closed on my ultimate dream home. It sat nestled in a quiet, leafy suburb of Omaha, far away from the chaotic noise of my childhood. The property featured 4 spacious bedrooms, brilliant natural light, and hardwood floors that gleamed under the warm recessed lighting. But the crown jewel of the house was my sanctuary, my home office. I spent weeks designing the space. It held custom oak bookshelves I had painstakingly built by hand, using the antique woodworking tools my late grandfather left me. The scent of the stained wood reminded me of him, reminding me of the education he tried to fund and the success I achieved despite the theft. It was my safe haven. Against every instinct screaming in my head, I stepped aside and let them wheel their luggage down the hall toward the backyard. I tried to be the good daughter. I tried to believe that adulthood and time had softened their sharp edges. I thought I could manage a few weeks of close proximity if they stayed contained within the detached guest suite. I was naive. The hostile takeover began almost immediately. Within 3 days, the guest house was no longer enough. My parents started seeping into the main house like a slow, creeping dampness. I would wake up at 6 in the morning to find my mother sitting at my kitchen island drinking my expensive coffee and scrutinizing my interior design choices. She ran a critical finger over the marble countertops. "Such a vast, empty space for one single woman," she murmured, staring at the vaulted ceiling. "It feels cold, Naomi. A house this size requires a family, a real family." I ignored the subtle digs, pouring my coffee in silence and retreating to my office. But the subtle digs transformed into outright demands 2 weeks later. We were sitting at my dining table, eating a dinner I had cooked and paid for, when Jessica and Brad arrived unannounced. Jessica dropped a small, wrapped gift box onto the table. Inside was a pair of tiny knitted booties. She was pregnant. The room erupted into cheers. My mother wept tears of joy, hugging Brad as if he had just won a Nobel Prize. My father ordered me to open a bottle of vintage champagne I had been saving for a business milestone. As I poured the drinks, the atmosphere shifted. The celebratory mood crystallized into a targeted campaign. My mother wiped her eyes and looked directly at me. "Well, the timing is just perfect," she declared. "Jessica and Brad are suffocating in their tiny apartment. A baby needs a yard. A baby needs a proper nursery." She waved her hand around my spacious dining room. "You have 4 bedrooms, Naomi. It just makes practical sense for them to raise the child here." I set the champagne bottle down hard. The heavy glass clunked against the wood. "This is my home," I stated, keeping my voice steady and low. "It is not a communal property." Jessica scoffed, rolling her eyes and leaning back in her chair. "Do not be so selfish," she muttered. "You sit in front of a computer all day. Why do you need a yard?" The psychological siege intensified the very next morning. I woke up to the sound of a heavy diesel engine idling right outside my window. I rushed to the front door and threw it open. My father had parked his large dual-tire pickup truck directly on my manicured front lawn. The heavy treads crushed the delicate grass I had spent weeks cultivating, leaving deep, muddy ruts in the soil. "What are you doing?" I yelled, stepping off the porch in my bare feet. "The driveway is wide open." Richard stepped out of the cab, adjusting his baseball cap. "The angle is better here for washing the tailgate," he replied casually, uncoiling my garden hose. "Move it now," I demanded. My heart pounded against my ribs. "You are destroying the landscaping." He dropped the hose and walked toward me. His shadow fell over my face, blocking the morning sun. "You have a terrible attitude, Naomi," he sneered. "A little mud will wash away. You should show more respect to the man who put a roof over your head for 18 years. He walked away, leaving the truck parked on the ruined grass. I felt a cold knot of dread form in my stomach. The boundary pushing did not stop at the landscaping. 3 days later, I returned home from a long day at the accounting firm. I walked up to my front door and punched my personalized code into the electronic smart lock. The keypad flashed a harsh red light and buzzed an error tone. I tried again. Red light, error tone. Panic flared in my chest. I knocked heavily on the solid wood. A minute later, my father pulled the door open, holding a sandwich. "What is wrong with the lock?" I asked, my voice trembling with suppressed anger. He took a bite of his sandwich, chewing slowly. "I reprogrammed it," he said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Your code was too difficult to remember. I changed it to Jessica's birth year. It is much easier for your mother." I stood frozen on my own front porch, locked out of the house I bought with my own sweat and tears, because my father preferred his golden child's birth year. He did not ask for permission. He did not even send a text message. He simply altered the security of my sanctuary to suit his convenience. I realized in that moment they were launching a deliberate, calculated war of attrition. They wanted to strip away my comfort piece by piece. I demanded the new code, marched inside, and immediately locked myself inside my home office. I sat in the leather chair, staring at the custom oak bookshelves, breathing in the scent of the wood. The walls felt like they were closing in. Every time I stepped out of this room, I faced another microaggression, another comment about my single status, another demand to clear out the guest bedroom so Jessica could start planning a nursery theme. They wanted to make my daily existence so miserable, so fraught with tension that I would eventually hand over the deed just to buy my peace. I spent my evenings drafting firm boundaries. I typed up formal rules for the guest house. I confronted my mother about her manipulative comments. I demanded my father move his truck, but my words evaporated into thin air. They ignored every boundary, treating my protests like the tantrums of a stubborn child. They looked at me not as a homeowner, but as a temporary placeholder, maintaining their future real estate. I thought I was just dealing with deeply toxic, entitled relatives. I thought the worst thing they could do was ruin my lawn and insult my lifestyle. I sat in the dim light of my office, believing this was merely a battle over physical boundaries and emotional respect. I was so consumed by the daily friction in my hallways that I failed to see the true danger lurking in the shadows. I had no idea my parents were not just plotting to wear me down emotionally. I had no idea that while I was busy defending my front lawn, they were quietly orchestrating a devastating financial crime that would threaten to wipe out everything I had ever built. The turning point happened 3 months ago. My accounting firm was bursting at the seams. I had recently hired 3 new junior accountants, and we were practically working on top of each other in the leased commercial space I had occupied for 4 years. The constant hum of overlapping phone calls and the clatter of keyboards echoed off the thin walls. We desperately needed a larger office. I spent weeks touring commercial properties until I found the ideal building in downtown Omaha. It featured floor-to-ceiling windows, a dedicated conference room, and enough square footage to accommodate my projected growth for the next decade. To secure the property, I needed a commercial business loan. I gathered my financial portfolios, tax returns, and profit statements, organizing them into neat, immaculate folders. I took immense pride in my pristine credit history. I paid off every credit card balance in full every single month. I never missed a mortgage payment or paid a bill late. I built my credit score with the same obsessive precision I used to build my business. I walked through the heavy glass doors of the local bank branch, expecting a routine meeting. I wore my best tailored navy suit, anticipating a warm handshake, a quick signature, and an immediate approval. The branch manager, David Harrison, sat behind a polished mahogany desk. He usually greeted me with a wide smile and easy small talk about the local sports teams. Today, he did not smile. He looked down at a thick manila folder resting under his folded hands. The silence in his office felt heavy and unnatural. The low hum of the air conditioning unit suddenly sounded very loud in my ears. I sat in the leather chair across from him, smoothing the skirt of my suit, waiting for him to speak. David cleared his throat, avoiding eye contact as he opened the folder. He slid a printed credit report across the smooth wood surface. I expected to see my flawless scores printed at the top of the page. Instead, my eyes caught a bold red flag warning dominating the center of the document. David pointed to a liability section I had never seen before, Naomi. He began, keeping his voice uncharacteristically quiet. I need you to explain this outstanding balance. Your debt-to-income ratio is currently unsustainable for a commercial loan of this size. I frowned and pulled the paper closer. I read the line item 3 times before the words actually registered in my brain. 5 years ago, a $75,000 home equity line of credit had been taken out against my very first starter home. The loan was maxed out. Not a single payment had been made toward the principal in half a decade. The accrued interest was staggering. I stared at the black ink on the white paper. The air rushed out of my lungs. The heavy leather chair felt like it was dropping out from under me. I do not understand, I whispered, shaking my head. I sold that starter home 3 years ago. I never took out an equity line. David frowned, tapping a silver pen against his desk pad. The lien was recorded just months before the sale, he explained. It bypassed the closing escrow and transferred as an outstanding personal unsecured liability. He pulled another document from his folder and handed it to me. It was a photocopy of the original loan agreement. I looked at the bottom of the page. There, on the dotted line, was my name. The signature was technically spelling out Naomi Anderson, but the handwriting was all wrong. I write with a distinct, sharp slant. This handwriting was rounded. The slant of the letters tilted too far to the left. The loop on the capital letter was jagged and rushed. It was a clumsy, obvious forgery. Someone had walked into a financial institution and signed my name to steal $75,000 from the equity I had painstakingly built in my 20s. A cold sweat broke out across the back of my neck. I looked David in the eye and told him this was a fraudulent account. I told him I never signed those papers and never saw a dime of that money. He advised me to file a police report immediately. He also delivered the crushing news that until the fraud was legally proven and cleared from my record, my business loan was indefinitely suspended. I left the bank in a total daze. The bright Omaha sunlight stung my eyes. I gripped my steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I drove straight back to my office, canceled my afternoon appointments, and locked my door. I am a certified public accountant. My entire career is built on finding missing numbers and tracing hidden funds. I was not going to sit around and wait for a slow-moving police detective to untangle this mess. I pulled up my dual monitors and began a relentless forensic audit of my own stolen history. I contacted the equity line lender and demanded the full transfer logs and disbursement records. I expected to find a trail leading to a faceless identity thief. I assumed a random hacker had stolen my social security number and routed the funds to a hidden offshore crypto wallet. I prepared myself to fight an invisible ghost in cyberspace. 2 excruciating hours later, the digital records arrived in my secure inbox. I opened the file. The glow of the monitor cast a harsh blue light across my face in the dim office. I scrolled down page after page of transaction history until I reached the final wire transfer destination. The $75,000 had not vanished into the dark web. The money was wired directly into a regional bank account registered to a domestic limited liability company. I stared at the name of the LLC printed on the screen, Miller Enterprises. Miller was my mother's maiden name. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The blood rushed out of my face, leaving my skin icy and numb. My hands shook over the keyboard. I accessed the Nebraska State Business Registry database and typed in the company name. The results loaded in less than a second. The registered agent for Miller Enterprises was Richard Anderson, my father. The registered address was my childhood home. The puzzle pieces snapped together with bone-crushing force. 5 years ago, my father forged my signature on a legal bank document. He used his intimate knowledge of my starter home and my pristine credit to extract a small fortune. He routed the stolen equity into a shell company, hiding behind my mother's maiden name. I leaned back in my office chair, staring blindly at the ceiling. The memory of that specific timeline flooded my mind. 5 years ago was the exact same time Jessica married Brad. It was the same year my parents hosted a lavish country club wedding reception featuring open bars, imported floral arrangements, and a live band. It was the same year Brad mysteriously paid off his initial wave of credit card debt. My father had not magically saved up enough cash to fund the golden child's perfect fairy tale. He literally mortgaged my future to pay for it. He stole the equity from the house I bought with the money I earned while scrubbing toilets in college. He stole from me to spoil her. Again. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. A wave of profound nausea washed over me. I grabbed the edge of my desk, fighting the sudden urge to be sick. Every condescending remark my father made on my patio, every critical look my mother gave my interior design, every time they parked their heavy truck on my lawn took on a terrifying new context. They were not just toxic, entitled relatives pushing emotional boundaries. They were active felons. They were financial predators living under my roof, eating my food, and demanding I hand over my current property to the very sister whose wedding was funded by my stolen equity. They felt invincible. They believed I was too focused on growing my career to ever uncover a 5-year-old paper trail. They thought they had buried the theft perfectly, leaving no loose ends. But they made one fatal error. They chose to steal from an auditor. I sat in the quiet hum of my office, surrounded by the undeniable proof of their crimes. The betrayal was so deep it bypassed anger and settled into a cold, hard, razor-sharp focus. I hit print. I printed every single document, every transfer log, every state registry listing. The stack of paper felt heavy in my hands. It was the weight of a loaded weapon. But as I reviewed the forged home equity line of credit application, one glaring detail stood out. Taking out a loan of that size with a forged signature requires bypassing rigid security protocols. The bank would require identification verification. They would demand an in-person notary to witness the signature. My father could not have pulled off this level of federal wire fraud by himself. He needed someone on the inside. He needed a corrupt accomplice to stamp that paperwork and look the other way. I picked up the phone. I knew exactly who to call to help me hunt down the missing link. I sat in the quiet hum of my office, surrounded by the undeniable proof of their crimes. The betrayal was absolute, but I did not have time to drown in the shock. I picked up my phone and dialed the only person ruthless enough to help me navigate this legal nightmare. Her name was Evelyn Ross. Evelyn was a senior partner at a top-tier civil litigation firm in downtown Omaha. She possessed a terrifying reputation for dismantling corporate fraudsters with surgical precision. I met her 2 years ago during a complex tax audit for one of her wealthy clients. She was a tall, intimidating woman who wore sharp-tailored suits and spoke in a low, measured voice that commanded complete authority. She did not tolerate fools, and she never lost a case in the courtroom. I walked into the spacious corner office of her firm the following morning. The expansive glass walls overlooked the city skyline, but my focus remained entirely on the thick stack of printed evidence clutched in my hands. I placed the massive dossier on her polished glass desk. She adjusted her silver-framed glasses and opened the file. The room fell perfectly silent. I watched her eyes scan the forged home equity line of credit application, the incoming transfer logs, and the state registry listing for Miller Enterprises. She closed the folder and folded her hands over the documents. "Your father is incredibly arrogant," she observed flatly, "but he is certainly not a financial mastermind. A bank fraud of this specific magnitude requires a verified notary seal. Someone on the inside had to bypass the strict identity verification protocols." She flipped back to the final page of the loan agreement and tapped her manicured fingernail against the small black ink stamp at the bottom of the document. I leaned closer across the desk. The official stamp bore the name Marcus Trent. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but I could not immediately place it in my memory. Evelyn turned to her sleek computer terminal and typed the name into a private legal database. Within seconds, the professional profile of Marcus Trent materialized on her glowing monitor. He was a senior loan officer at a regional credit union located less than 5 miles from my parents' house. But the true sinister connection clicked into place when Evelyn pulled up his public social media profiles. There, staring back at me from a high-resolution photograph, was Marcus, standing on a lush green golf course. He had his arms slung casually around the shoulders of another man. That man was my father, Richard Anderson. They were golfing buddies. The sick, twisted reality of their criminal conspiracy began to take shape. My father had leveraged his local country club connections to find a willing accomplice. But why would a senior loan officer risk his lucrative career and his personal freedom to authorize a forged federal document for a casual friend? Normal people do not commit severe felonies simply to be helpful. They do it because they are intensely desperate. Evelyn deployed her best private investigator to dig deeply into the background of Marcus Trent. We needed to thoroughly understand his specific motivation before we could use him as a pawn to destroy my father. What the seasoned investigator uncovered 3 days later blew the entire legal case wide open. Marcus was merely posing as a legitimate banker. Behind closed doors, he was a severe, degenerate gambling addict. The investigator found a mountain of concrete evidence linking the corrupt loan officer to an underground sports betting ring operating across the Midwest. Marcus owed tens of thousands of dollars to highly dangerous, demanding individuals who were losing their patience. My father, who constantly bragged about knowing every single secret floating around the local gossip circles, had clearly discovered the desperate financial situation of his golfing partner. They struck a dark, mutually beneficial deal in the shadows. My father needed $75,000 to fund his golden child's extravagant lifestyle. Marcus needed a massive influx of untraceable cash to pay off his illicit gambling debts before his bookies broke his legs. My father forged my signature on the application. Marcus applied his official notary seal, bypassing every single legal safeguard and internal bank protocol. They split my stolen home equity right down the middle. We traced the exact flow of the remaining funds. After the desperate loan officer took his cut, the rest of the money was funneled directly through the fake company my father created under my mother's maiden name. From there, the bank records showed a series of massive certified checks written directly to luxury wedding vendors. $12,000 went to an exotic floral importer. $15,000 paid for the exclusive country club venue deposit. $10,000 was handed to a custom bridal boutique. The stolen money paid for every single opulent detail of Jessica's lavish reception. Another large portion was wired directly into the personal checking account belonging to Brad. That specific wire transfer magically cleared out his initial wave of massive consumer debt right before the wedding ceremony. My father literally mortgaged my entire future to buy his favorite daughter her perfect fairy tale. He knowingly jeopardized my professional accounting license, my flawless credit score, and my hard-earned financial stability just so Jessica could have her dream wedding without Brad looking like a complete failure in front of the guests. The rage brewing inside my chest crystallized into something cold and unbreakable. I did not want to merely confront them in my living room. A loud, emotional argument would allow my father to spin his usual web of manipulative lies. He would try to gaslight me, claiming it was a simple misunderstanding or a temporary loan he always intended to repay. He would rely on decades of toxic family dynamics to force my silence and compliance. I wanted the absolute, total destruction of his false kingdom. Evelyn and I spent the next 2 weeks working relentlessly in complete secrecy. We did not just build a standard civil lawsuit to recover the stolen funds. We compiled a bulletproof forensic legal dossier. We gathered the forged loan documents, the wire transfer logs, the fake limited liability company registration, the country club photographs, and the private investigator reports detailing the illegal sports betting ring. We bound it all into a single devastating weapon of justice. Then we bypassed the local police department entirely. Small-town detectives were often too slow and easily manipulated by well-connected, loud businessmen like Richard Anderson. Instead, Evelyn hand-delivered the entire forensic package directly to a powerful contact she knew at the Nebraska Attorney General office. We submitted a formal, comprehensive report for major financial crimes, identity theft, and felony wire fraud. The federal trap was officially set. All we had to do was wait for the state authorities to process the evidence and issue the formal indictments. But while I was secretly dismantling their entire lives behind closed doors, my parents were still living comfortably in my guest house, completely oblivious to the incoming legal storm. They continued their daily campaign of subtle psychological warfare. They still thought they held the upper hand in our relationship. They still believed I was merely a naive, exhausted scapegoat they could eventually bully into completely surrendering my beautiful property. Their aggressive entitlement escalated to a terrifying breaking point exactly 2 days after Evelyn delivered the dossier to the state prosecutors. I returned home from my accounting firm feeling a profound sense of quiet victory. I pulled into my neighborhood, expecting to see my father's heavy pickup truck parked aggressively on my ruined front lawn. The obnoxious truck was present, but the solid oak front door to my main house was propped wide open. A large commercial moving van was backed up completely onto my pristine concrete driveway. 2 muscular men in matching gray uniforms were carrying a heavy wooden baby crib up my front steps. My mother was standing on my porch, holding a plastic clipboard barking sharp orders at the struggling movers. She wore a bright floral blouse and a serene, deeply entitled smile. I threw my car into park and sprinted across the yard. I loudly demanded to know what on earth she was doing in my house. My mother looked at me with total, absolute calm. She slowly lowered her clipboard. "Jessica is moving into the master suite today, Naomi," she announced smoothly. "Brad is bringing the rest of their bedroom furniture in an hour. We decided the guest house is far too small for the new baby, so you will be moving your personal belongings out there tonight." She did not ask for permission. She dictated my immediate physical eviction from my own home with the casual confidence of a queen rearranging her royal castle. She actually believed I would quietly pack my bags, surrender my house keys, and walk away. She had no idea the highest law enforcement office in the state was already reviewing her fraudulent bank accounts. Before I reveal the explosive confrontation that finally pushed my corrupt father to issue his ridiculous 10-minute ultimatum, please remember to subscribe to the Morning Revenge channel if you are enjoying this intense journey. Your support helps bring these powerful stories to light. Now let me tell you exactly how I handled my mother attempting to forcefully seize my master bedroom. I stared at the 2 muscular men wrestling the heavy mahogany crib up my front steps. My mother Brenda stood on the porch with her hands resting proudly on her hips. Her sickeningly sweet smile radiated pure, toxic entitlement. The hot afternoon sun beat down on the concrete driveway, making the air feel thick and suffocating. The loud, idling engine of the commercial moving van filled the quiet suburban street with the smell of heavy diesel exhaust. I did not scream or throw a childish tantrum. I simply walked directly into the path of the lead mover and held up my right hand. "Stop right there," I commanded. My voice was quiet but laced with absolute lethal authority. "I am the sole legal owner of this property. If you cross that threshold, you are committing criminal trespassing, and I will immediately have you arrested by the local authorities." The mover froze mid-step. Sweat dripped down his sunburned forehead. He looked at my mother and then back at my unblinking glare. He realized instantly that the woman wearing the bright floral blouse did not actually own the real estate. He signaled his partner with a quick nod. They abruptly dropped the heavy wooden crib onto the concrete porch, turned around, and marched straight back to their truck. Brenda gasped in horror. Her face flushed a deep, angry crimson. "How dare you humiliate me in front of the working class?" she hissed, clutching her leather purse tightly against her chest. "Jessica needs that room, Naomi. She needs a proper space for the new baby." I stepped closer to her, forcing her to retreat a single step backward toward the lawn. "Jessica can build a beautiful nursery in the cheap apartment her husband pays for," I replied coldly. "If you ever try to force furniture into my house again, I will legally evict you from the guest suite by nightfall." I slammed the solid oak door shut in her face and engaged the heavy metal deadbolt. My heart hammered violently against my ribs, but a fierce, powerful energy surged through my veins. I was no longer playing their twisted defensive games. I was systematically dismantling their entire illusion of control, piece by piece. The following afternoon, I sat at the sleek, modern desk in my downtown accounting office, reviewing complex corporate tax returns. The quiet hum of the air conditioning unit provided a soothing background noise. My computer monitor suddenly brightened with an incoming encrypted message from a prominent secondary lender named Apex Financial. My firm frequently consults for Apex, handling deep risk assessments on high-value anomalous loan applications. The senior underwriter had flagged a particularly disastrous file and requested my professional opinion on the rejection parameters. I clicked the secure attachment, expecting to analyze a standard struggling small business with poor cash flow. Instead, the name printed boldly at the top of the application made the blood freeze entirely in my veins. The applicant was Bradley Thomas, my arrogant, insufferable brother-in-law. Brad was applying for a massive, high-risk personal loan completely outside the bounds of traditional banking channels. He was not trying to secure a competitive mortgage rate or finance a luxury vehicle. The interest rate attached to this specific financial product was entirely predatory, bordering on legal extortion. A man only signs a contract with these brutal, unforgiving terms when he is drowning in a sea of desperate, sheer panic. I leaned closer to the glowing screen, digging deeper into his attached financial disclosures. Brad had brazenly lied on the federal forms about his annual income. He claimed his non-existent technology startup was generating massive quarterly revenue. He provided forged profit statements that looked like they were generated by a high school student. But the experienced underwriters at Apex were viciously thorough. They had pulled a comprehensive shadow trace on his associated personal banking accounts. There, buried deeply in the rejection file, was a massive active liability Brad had desperately tried to conceal from the world. It was a $40,000 hidden debt linked directly to a series of rapid offshore wire transfers. My pulse thrummed a heavy, rapid rhythm against my throat. I opened my advanced forensic accounting software and cross-referenced the specific routing numbers listed in his file. I traced the digital footprint across multiple international ledgers. The overseas accounts were completely synonymous with illicit, unregulated online sports betting operations. The sickening realization hit me with the force of a runaway freight train. The obscure routing numbers in Brad's file perfectly matched the exact same underground criminal syndicate my attorney Evelyn had linked to Marcus Trent. Marcus was the corrupt local loan officer who had helped my father forge my home equity paperwork. He was swimming in the exact same muddy, dangerous water as my brother-in-law. The entire chaotic timeline violently clicked together in my mind. Brad was not a brilliant aspiring entrepreneur waiting for his big break. He was a degenerate gambling addict who had racked up $40,000 in illicit underworld debt to highly dangerous, unforgiving creditors. Suddenly, the relentless, aggressive campaign to seize my four-bedroom sanctuary made terrifying logical sense. Brad did not care about providing a beautiful, sunny nursery for his unborn child. He did not care about the highly rated local school district or the quiet safety of my suburban neighborhood. He was receiving violent threats from aggressive Midwestern bookies, and he needed a massive influx of untraceable cash immediately. He realized my house was a fully paid-off premium asset. If he could successfully convince my aging parents to force me out and legally hand over the deed, he could instantly use the property as collateral. He planned to mortgage my blood, my sweat, and my years of sacrifice to save his own kneecaps from being shattered in a dark alleyway. I leaned back in my soft leather chair, feeling a wave of intense physical disgust wash over me. I recalled a brief, annoying conversation with Jessica several weeks prior. We were standing in my kitchen, drinking coffee, and she casually complained that Brad had confiscated all her debit cards. He told her he was strictly managing their joint checking accounts to maximize their new investment portfolio. She whined loudly about not being able to buy expensive designer maternity clothes. She willfully ignored the massive, glaring red flags waving right in front of her face. She chose to blindly trust a man who wore cheap, overpowering cologne and lied for a living. She constantly demanded the shiny keys to my physical fortress while eagerly sleeping next to a financial predator who was secretly plotting her complete, total ruin. Their entire, perfect, flawless marriage was a hollow, rotting facade built entirely on aggressive financial deception. My father had committed severe federal wire fraud to pay for a lavish fairy tale wedding that was destined to completely fail before the reception champagne even lost its fizz. They were a pathetic cluster of parasites, feeding off my labor, and now their toxic ecosystem was collapsing rapidly from the inside out. I printed the entire Apex rejection file. The printer hummed loudly, spitting out page after page of Brad's financial doom. I gathered the warm papers and added them to the growing mountain of lethal evidence securely locked inside my bottom desk drawer. I possess the absolute total power to destroy every single one of them with a quick phone call to the state authorities. But turning the explosive documents over to the Attorney General was a quiet, clinical, invisible victory. They deserved a very public, catastrophic humiliation. They had spent my entire existence belittling my hard-earned achievements and parading Jessica around the community as the ultimate golden prize. I wanted them to face their complete destruction in front of the very audience they fought so desperately to impress. I needed the perfect stage to execute my final calculated maneuver. The ideal opportunity presented itself exactly 2 days later. My mother decided to host a massive extended family barbecue in my beautiful backyard, inviting every single aunt, uncle, and cousin to openly celebrate Jessica's pregnancy. She planned to use the large captive audience to corner me and publicly pressure me into permanently surrendering the house deed. She had absolutely no idea she was actually building the wooden platform for her own spectacular public execution. My mother was busy planning her grand suburban barbecue, blissfully unaware that her perfect son-in-law was a degenerate gambler facing the violent wrath of underground bookies. While Brenda spent her afternoons finalizing expensive catering menus and ordering custom floral centerpieces as if she actually owned the property she was decorating, I retreated to the quiet sanctuary of my downtown office. I sat behind my heavy wooden desk, dealing with the expanding radioactive fallout of my deeply corrupted family tree. The deeper I dug into the financial history of my blood relatives, the more the sickening rot seemed to spread. My accounting firm handled the complex quarterly tax filings for several massive corporate clients across the state of Nebraska. One of our absolute largest and most lucrative accounts was Apex Construction. They were a premier commercial development firm responsible for building half the new office parks and luxury apartment complexes in the greater Omaha region. Ironically, this highly respected, powerful company was also the longtime employer of my father, Richard Anderson. He held a comfortable senior management position, overseeing their massive regional logistics division, managing supply chains, and authorizing large vendor payments. Given the shocking revelation that my father was perfectly capable of orchestrating a brazen federal wire fraud against his own flesh and blood, I suddenly viewed his entire professional career through a highly suspicious lens. A man who casually steals $75,000 from his daughter's home equity does not magically develop a rigid moral compass when handling millions of dollars in corporate building supplies. The sheer audacity required to forge my signature on a federal bank document told me everything I needed to know about his true character. I decided to initiate a brutally thorough, completely unannounced forensic audit of the Apex Construction logistical accounts under his direct supervision. I closed my office blinds, locked my solid mahogany door, and brewed a massive pot of dark black coffee. I pulled 3 years of comprehensive digital ledgers, expense reports, and vendor payment histories onto my dual high-resolution monitors. The sheer volume of raw data was overwhelming, but I am a woman who built an entire empire by finding the hidden numbers that lazy accountants ignore. I know exactly where the rats hide in the walls. I spent 3 agonizing nights digging through the digital mud. The harsh blue light of the screens burned my eyes, and my shoulders ached from the tension, but my anger provided a relentless fuel. The first 2 years of his managerial tenure looked relatively clean. But right around the exact same time Jessica married Brad, the financial records took a massive, suspicious turn. The corporate paper trail began to warp and twist in unnatural directions. I noticed a distinct pattern of highly unusual outgoing payments. My father had suddenly authorized a steady stream of massive invoices to a mysterious new concrete supply vendor. I ran the suspect vendor through the official state business registry. The concrete supplier did not actually exist. There was no active license, no commercial website, and no registered phone number. I pulled the property records for the corporate address attached to the outgoing invoices. The location was a completely vacant dirt lot, sitting an hour outside the city limits. I tracked the routing numbers attached to the cleared corporate checks. The money was flowing out of the legitimate Apex Construction corporate accounts and dumping straight into an untraceable shadow account controlled entirely by my father. He was utilizing a sophisticated web of completely fabricated vendor invoices to siphon massive amounts of corporate cash under the guise of buying construction materials. He created fake purchase orders, approved the forged documents himself, and quietly routed the funds away from his employer. I carefully calculated the final, devastating total. Over the course of 36 months, Richard Anderson had systematically embezzled over $120,000 from the very company that paid his salary and provided his health insurance. Where did all that stolen corporate cash go? It certainly did not sit in a traditional retirement fund or a boring savings account. I cross-referenced the dates of the largest illegal withdrawals with the obnoxious social media posts consistently uploaded by my sister. The correlation was terrifyingly exact. Every single time my father transferred stolen money into his hidden shadow account, Jessica and Brad magically acquired a brand new luxury item. He was running a miniature internal Ponzi scheme to fund their entirely fake, opulent lifestyle. The $20,000 phantom concrete invoice exactly matched the date Brad leased his pristine silver German sports car. A $15,000 fabricated lumber expense perfectly aligned with the 2-week, all-inclusive luxury vacation Jessica took to a highly exclusive resort in the Maldives. The steady monthly embezzlement amounts identically mirrored the exorbitant monthly dues required to maintain their elite local country club memberships. My stomach twisted into a tight, painful knot. I thought about every single arrogant lecture my father ever delivered at the dinner table. I remembered him standing in his pressed blue shirt, sipping expensive bourbon, loudly boasting about his incredible work ethic and his brilliant financial acumen. He constantly belittled my grinding, exhausting journey through night school, telling me I lacked the inherent natural talent required to achieve real wealth. The reality was absolutely sickening. The imposing patriarch who demanded absolute obedience and constant respect from everyone in his orbit was nothing but a common, unoriginal corporate thief. As a licensed, certified public accountant, I do not possess the luxury of looking the other way. My entire professional existence is legally bound by a strict, unwavering code of ethical conduct. Discovering a massive 6-figure corporate fraud inside one of my own client accounts and failing to report it would instantly destroy my license and expose me to severe federal prosecution as a silent accomplice. My father had foolishly placed a loaded gun directly against the head of my career. He assumed I would simply cover for him because we shared the same last name. I did not hesitate. I did not shed a single tear for his impending downfall. I compiled a massive, watertight digital file containing every single forged invoice, every phantom routing number, and the final devastating total of the embezzled funds. I drafted a highly confidential, securely encrypted message. I bypassed the standard middle management human resources channels entirely and sent the massive forensic dossier directly to the primary chief executive officer of Apex Construction. I provided them with the exact blueprint needed to freeze his accounts and terminate his employment immediately. But I did not stop there. Embezzled corporate money is considered highly taxable income by the federal government. My father had deliberately failed to claim a single penny of that stolen $120,000 on his annual tax filings. I filled out an official whistleblower form attaching the identical forensic evidence and submitted the entire package directly to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. I essentially dropped a massive, invisible nuclear bomb squarely onto the foundation of his entire arrogant existence. I sealed his fate, ensuring he would face aggressive corporate litigation, severe civil financial penalties, and virtually guaranteed federal prison time for tax evasion and embezzlement. The most beautiful part of this entire catastrophic situation was his complete and total ignorance. While federal agents were quietly reviewing his criminal tax evasion and his powerful boss was preparing a devastating legal lawsuit, Richard remained completely oblivious. He woke up every single morning sleeping comfortably in my guest house, entirely convinced he was the untouchable king of the world. He continued to treat me like a worthless subordinate. He complained loudly about the brand of coffee I purchased and demanded I adjust the central air conditioning to suit his exact personal preference. He strutted around my property acting like a victorious conquering general, while I quietly held the ultimate power to permanently end his entire life as a free man. This terrifying contrast brings us perfectly to the boiling point of this entire nightmare. The morning of the grand family barbecue arrived with a heavy, suffocating Midwestern heat. My mother spent hours arranging folding tables across my pristine backyard, decking them out with expensive matching tablecloths and massive imported floral arrangements she paid for using my stolen equity. The entire extended family began pouring through my side wooden gate, carrying bowls of potato salad and offering loud, obnoxious congratulations to Jessica on her impending motherhood. The air grew thick with the smell of roasting meat and the loud sound of hypocritical laughter. My father stood near the expensive stainless steel grill holding a pair of silver tongs, holding court as the generous patriarch providing for his grateful clan. He waited until the entire family was seated around the massive glass patio table. He waited until every single eye was focused firmly on him before he launched his final aggressive ambush. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp, formally drafted quitclaim deed. He threw the legal paper onto the glass surface, demanding I sign away the very property we were standing on in less than 10 minutes. He thought his public ultimatum was a brilliant stroke of genius. He thought the heavy pressure of 20 staring relatives would instantly force me to crumble and obey. He had absolutely no idea that instead of a pen, I was about to hand him an eviction notice and a front row seat to his own spectacular destruction. Armed with the devastating arsenal of federal evidence securely encrypted on my hard drive, I faced the most grueling endurance test of my entire 34 years. I had to play a role. I needed to transform back into the submissive, breaking daughter they always believed me to be. If I showed even a fraction of the lethal confidence boiling beneath my skin, my father would instantly sense the shift. He was a corporate predator, and predators know exactly when their prey suddenly stops running. For the next 14 days, I let my parents rapidly escalate their relentless psychological warfare. The microaggressions amplified into blatant territorial invasions designed to push me out of my own physical space. My mother, Brenda, orchestrated a daily calculated campaign of visual intimidation. I would walk into my custom kitchen at dawn, exhausted from late-night forensic accounting sessions, and find glossy maternity catalogs strategically spread across the Marble Island. She used a thick red marker to heavily circle expensive nursery furniture. One morning, she left a brochure for a luxury custom crib resting directly on top of my laptop keyboard. I picked up the glossy paper, staring at the exorbitant price tag. Brenda breezed into the kitchen, pouring herself a cup of the premium dark roast I purchased. She smiled a tight, thin expression that held absolutely zero genuine warmth. "I was thinking a soft sage green for the walls," she murmured, tracing the rim of her ceramic mug. "Jessica always loved pastel tones. You really should start packing your winter clothes, Naomi. The guest suite closets are incredibly cramped, and we need to schedule the professional painters before the third trimester begins." My fingernails dug sharply into my palms. I forced my facial muscles to relax, projecting an aura of defeated exhaustion. "I will start sorting boxes this weekend," I whispered, looking down at the hardwood floor to hide the dangerous spark in my eyes. Her victorious smirk was so bright, it practically illuminated the room. But Brenda was merely the opening act. My father, Richard, decided to completely obliterate whatever flimsy physical boundaries remained inside my property. 3 days later, I returned from the office to find an unfamiliar white commercial van parked in my driveway. I walked through the front door and heard the distinct metallic snap of a steel measuring tape echoing from the second floor. I sprinted up the carpeted stairs and froze in the doorway of my personal master bathroom. A burly man in denim overalls was dragging muddy work boots across my pristine white tile, loudly calling out dimensions. My father stood near the dual vanity holding a clipboard and nodding in agreement. "What is going on here?" I demanded, my voice trembling with genuine shock. Richard did not even bother to turn around. He waved his hand dismissively, swatting away my protest like an annoying fly. "We are widening the shower stall," he announced over his shoulder. "The current setup is far too dangerous for a pregnant woman. We need to install proper grip bars and a seating bench for your sister." "This is my private bathroom," I protested, stepping forward. "You cannot just invite random contractors into my private space without asking." He finally turned to face me, his dark eyes flashing with sudden, intense aggression. He closed the distance between us, pointing a thick finger directly at my chest. You are being completely unreasonable again, Naomi. This family is expanding. We are making necessary practical adjustments. If you cannot handle a minor renovation to accommodate your own flesh and blood, maybe you are too emotionally fragile to handle home ownership at all. The psychological siege was perfectly designed to make me feel utterly powerless in my own sanctuary. They wanted to slowly suffocate my spirit until the only logical escape route was complete, absolute surrender. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. I nodded silently, turning away and retreating to my home office. I locked the heavy solid oak door behind me, leaning against the cool wood as tears of profound rage burned my eyes. The emotional toll was physically exhausting. I stopped sleeping entirely. My diet consisted of black coffee and pure adrenaline. I felt like a prisoner trapped inside a beautiful golden cage I had built with my own hands. I watched through the slanted blinds of my office window as Jessica and Brad strutted around my manicured backyard. Brad wore his expensive aviator sunglasses, gesturing broadly toward my custom stone fire pit as if he had personally laid every single brick. He was drowning in $40,000 of illicit offshore gambling debt, sweating under the constant terrifying threat of violent retribution, yet he paraded across my lawn like a victorious king claiming a new kingdom. Beside him, Jessica rubbed her small belly, willfully ignoring the massive financial rot destroying her fake marriage. She was eager to steal my hard-earned stability to cushion her completely delusional reality. There were nights the internal pressure became so agonizingly heavy, I wanted to throw open the front door and scream the absolute truth into the quiet suburban street. I wanted to violently hurl their designer luggage onto the concrete driveway and expose every single felony right then and there. I wanted to watch my father's arrogant face crumble as I revealed his massive corporate embezzlement and the impending federal tax evasion charges. But striking too early would be a fatal tactical error. I spent my evenings coordinating quietly with Evelyn over heavily encrypted phone calls. She warned me repeatedly that arrogant white-collar criminals thrive in the shadows. If I confronted them in private, they would instantly begin spinning their defensive narrative. Richard was a master manipulator. He would find a way to gaslight the situation, play the ultimate victim, and rally the entire extended family against me before the criminal indictments ever landed. He would paint me as a hysterical, vindictive spinster trying to ruin her sweet, pregnant sister. I needed a captive audience. I needed them to corner me publicly in front of the very people they sought to impress, so there would be absolutely no escape route when the legal hammer finally shattered their perfect illusion. They gladly provided the ultimate venue. Brenda, obsessed with maintaining false appearances, decided to host a massive summer barbecue to officially celebrate the pregnancy. She spent my stolen equity on expensive catering, taking absolute total control of my backyard. She invited every single aunt, uncle, and cousin, creating a massive, loud crowd of 20 relatives. As I sat in my locked office confirming the final legal filings, I realized the true genius of their twisted plan. They intended to use the barbecue as a public execution of my independence. Richard planned to ambush me in front of the entire Anderson clan, presenting the property transfer documents while surrounded by a cheering crowd. He calculated that the sheer, overwhelming pressure of familial expectation would force me to sign away my home to avoid ruining the joyous celebration. He assumed I would crack under the heavy weight of public humiliation. He never anticipated that the quiet, exhausted workhorse had quietly transformed into a venomous snake, patiently waiting in the tall grass. Before I take you into the explosive confrontation where I finally unleashed my venom, please support the Morning Revenge channel by subscribing and sharing your thoughts below. I spent the final 48 hours before the party meticulously preparing my counterstrike. Every forged signature, every offshore wire transfer, every single piece of devastating evidence was printed, bound, and ready. The trap was perfectly set, and they were walking right into the jaws of absolute ruin. The climax began on a beautifully clear Saturday afternoon. The late summer sky hung above Omaha like a brilliant blue canvas devoid of a single cloud. I spent the morning inside my home office, finalizing the massive digital files I had compiled over the past 2 weeks. The heavy oak door muffled the chaotic noises echoing from my backyard. My mother, Brenda, had officially launched her grand celebratory barbecue. She invited the entire extended family without my permission. The guest list included every single aunt, uncle, and cousin who shared our bloodline. I could hear the loud, boisterous laughter of my Uncle Gary, an insurance salesman who spoke too loudly and drank too much cheap beer. I could hear my Aunt Susan gossiping about her neighbors. I could hear the high-pitched squeals of small children running across my manicured lawn. They were treating my private sanctuary like a public park. I closed my laptop, securing the encrypted evidence that would soon send my father to federal prison. I smoothed the fabric of my dark linen trousers, took a slow, deep breath, and turned the brass handle of my office door. I walked down the quiet hallway and pushed open the heavy sliding glass door leading out to the patio. The sudden wave of intense humidity hit my face instantly. The air was thick with the heavy scent of hickory wood smoke, sizzling hot dogs, and cheap floral perfume. Over 24 relatives swarmed my backyard. They sat on my expensive outdoor furniture, spilled sugary drinks on my pristine concrete, and filled the space with a suffocating level of noise. But the moment my feet stepped onto the patio, the atmosphere shifted violently. The trap was officially sprung. Sitting directly in the dead center of my large, tempered glass patio table was a single piece of crisp, white paper. It was not a casual napkin or a discarded recipe card. It was a formally printed, legally binding quitclaim deed. The black ink looked incredibly sharp against the bright afternoon sunlight. Beside the document rested a heavy silver ballpoint pen. My father Richard stood at the head of the table. He was wearing his signature pale blue button-down shirt, the sleeves rolled up precisely to the elbows, to project an image of hard-working masculinity. He held a pair of stainless steel grilling tongs in his left hand. The moment he saw me approach the table, he raised his right hand high into the air. "Listen up, everyone," he commanded. His voice carried the booming, unyielding authority of a man who believed he owned the entire universe. The boisterous laughter immediately died. The children stopped running. The entire extended family turned their heads, dropping their paper plates and silencing their conversations. 20 pairs of eyes locked onto me as I stood alone near the sliding glass door. The silence became absolutely deafening. The only sound left in the yard was the quiet hiss of meat cooking on the hot grill. Richard pointed his thick finger directly at the printed document resting on the glass table. His face was stone cold, completely devoid of any paternal warmth or basic human empathy. "Your sister is pregnant and desperately needs the space," he announced loudly, ensuring every single relative heard his exact words. His voice echoed across the quiet suburban yard. "Sign the house over to Jessica in the next 10 minutes or do not ever call us Mom and Dad again." A sharp, collective gasp ripped through the crowd of relatives. Aunt Susan covered her mouth with both hands. Uncle Gary stared at the grass, suddenly finding his shoes incredibly interesting. No one stepped forward to defend me. No one questioned the sheer, absolute insanity of a father demanding his daughter surrender a 4-bedroom property she bought with her own money. They had been conditioned by decades of watching Richard lay down his brutal law. They were the silent, complicit audience he needed to execute his final maneuver. I stood perfectly still, letting his horrific words hang in the heavy summer air. He was utilizing the oldest, most manipulative tactic in his entire playbook: public humiliation. He was banking heavily on the terrified, eager-to-please little girl I used to be. He vividly remembered the 18-year-old teenager who cried when he drained her college fund. He remembered the exhausted college student who desperately craved her parents' approval. He genuinely believed that the crippling fear of being formally disowned and permanently exiled in front of the entire Anderson clan would instantly force me into total, absolute submission. He thought I would crumble, weep, and apologize for being so incredibly selfish. He thought I would grab that silver pen and sign away my sanctuary just to keep the peace and remain part of this deeply broken family. I shifted my gaze away from his arrogant face and looked across the patio toward the expensive stainless steel grill. Jessica stood there wearing a flowing white maternity dress, holding a plastic cup of iced lemonade. She did not look shocked or embarrassed by our father's brutal ultimatum. She was actively smirking. Her lips curled into a sickeningly sweet, victorious smile. She raised her right hand and casually jingled a shiny new set of brass keys. They were spare keys to my front door. Keys she had secretly copied without my knowledge or consent. She thought she had already won. She was mentally redecorating my master bathroom and deciding where to place her heavy mahogany crib. Beside her, Brad leaned against the brick retaining wall, chewing a toothpick and trying to look confident. He was drowning in $40,000 of illicit offshore gambling debt, desperate to mortgage my property to save his own miserable life from violent bookies. They thought they had backed me into an inescapable corner. They thought they held all the cards because they relied on the heavy emotional chains of familial duty. I looked down at the silver ballpoint pen resting on the glass table. I thought about the thousands of hours I spent sitting under harsh fluorescent lights, crunching tax numbers to build my accounting firm. I thought about the 3 grueling jobs I worked during college while Jessica shopped at luxury boutiques. I thought about the $75,000 my father stole from my starter home equity to fund her lavish wedding. I thought about the $120,000 he embezzled from Apex Construction to fund their fake wealthy lifestyle. I looked back up at my parents' smug, expectant faces. I looked at the 20 silent relatives waiting for my emotional collapse. My pulse beat in a slow, incredibly steady rhythm against my throat. The crushing anxiety that usually accompanied their aggressive confrontations was completely gone. In its place was a cold, sharp, invincible clarity. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not beg for their love. I simply smiled. It was not a fragile, breaking smile. It was the terrifying, confident smile of a woman holding a royal flush in a high-stakes game of poker. The sudden upward curve of my lips sent a visible shockwave across the patio. Richard's cold, authoritative glare faltered for a fraction of a second. Brenda took a small, uncertain step backward, clutching her designer purse. Jessica stopped jingling the stolen keys. Her victorious smirk melted into a look of genuine confusion. They expected a desperate, frightened victim. They had absolutely no idea they were staring at a highly calculated executioner. If you are eager to hear exactly how I dropped the legal hammer on my corrupt family in front of the entire neighborhood, please remember to like and subscribe to the Morning Revenge channel. Your continued support keeps these intense stories flowing. I slowly reached into the pocket of my linen trousers, feeling the smooth brass locks of the compact leather briefcase resting on the chair beside the sliding door. I did not walk toward the glass table. I did not reach for the silver pen. Instead, I turned around, picked up my heavy leather briefcase, and carried it calmly toward the center of the patio. I placed it directly on top of the quitclaim deed, completely covering their ridiculous ultimatum. The loud, metallic snap of the brass locks opening echoed like a gunshot across the silent yard. The time for playing the submissive breaking daughter was officially over. It was time to show Richard Anderson exactly what happens when you force a forensic accountant into a corner. The loud metallic snap of the brass locks opening hung in the stifling summer air. My father, Richard, did not flinch. He simply crossed his arms over his pale blue shirt, watching me with dark, calculating eyes. He genuinely believed the contents of my leather briefcase were completely irrelevant. He thought I was simply reaching for my own expensive fountain pen to sign his ridiculous quitclaim deed. The imaginary 10-minute timer he had arrogantly set began to tick down in the humid Midwestern heat. The 20 relatives gathered across my pristine backyard remained entirely paralyzed, forming a silent audience of enablers. While the immense tension threatened to crack the concrete patio beneath our feet, Jessica and Brad decided they were entirely bored with the standoff. They had absolutely no doubt that victory was securely assured. They viewed my prolonged hesitation not as an act of defiance, but as the pathetic final death rattle of a defeated scapegoat. Completely ignoring the intense standoff happening near the grill, they turned their backs and boldly walked through the open sliding door directly into my private living room. I did not stop them. I simply stood at the glass table, keeping my hands resting near my open briefcase, watching their movements through the large, clear panes. The smell of roasting hickory wood from the barbecue mixed with the sickeningly sweet scent of my mother's cheap floral perfume, creating a nauseating combination. Inside my sanctuary, Jessica ran her hands over my expensive leather sofa, pointing toward the vaulted ceiling as she discussed her incoming interior design plans. Brad trailed closely behind her. He reached into the pocket of his tailored slacks and produced a bright yellow metal tape measure. I watched in utter disgust as he walked straight into my home office. That room was my quiet cathedral. It was the epicenter of my entire professional existence. Brad did not care about my boundaries. He pulled the metal tape, extending it across my large bay windows, loudly measuring the dimensions for future nursery drapes. Then he turned his attention toward the back wall. He slowly approached the custom-built in oak bookshelves, taking up the entire left side of the room. Those specific shelves were not just pieces of decorative furniture ordered from an expensive modern catalog. They were a physical manifestation of my sheer survival. I had painstakingly built every single wooden tier by hand, alongside my late grandfather. We spent weeks in his dusty, detached garage, measuring, cutting, and staining the heavy raw oak. We used his antique woodworking tools, breathing in the rich, earthly smell of sawdust and thick varnish. He was the very man who tried to secure my future. He was the kind man whose generous college fund my parents viciously stole to pay for Jessica's reckless credit card debt. Every time I ran my fingers over the smooth, stained wood of those shelves, I felt a profound connection to the only family member who truly believed in my ultimate potential. Brad stood in front of my sacred handiwork. He did not admire the detailed craftsmanship. He did not respect the immense physical labor required to build something sturdy and permanent. He laughed loudly, tossing the yellow tape measure from one hand to the other. He raised his arms, mimicking the aggressive, violent swing of a heavy steel sledgehammer. He pantomimed smashing directly through the center of the beautiful oak shelves, gesturing to Jessica that they needed to completely gut the entire wall to open up the floor plan for their new baby. The stark, visceral disrespect sent a shockwave of white-hot rage radiating directly through my chest. My knuckles turned completely pale against the dark leather of my briefcase. My pulse pounded a rapid, furious rhythm behind my eyes. He was a degenerate gambling addict secretly drowning in $40,000 of illicit offshore debt. He was a pathetic coward hiding from violent regional bookies, yet he possessed the unearned audacity to stand inside the home I paid for and mock the very legacy of the grandfather who actually worked an honest job. His disgusting pantomime did not break my spirit. It only solidified my lethal resolve into an unbreakable diamond. Brad sauntered back outside a few moments later. He stepped through the sliding glass door, bringing the overpowering stench of his artificial cologne back onto the patio. A cocky, arrogant grin was plastered permanently across his face. He walked over to the glass table, standing right next to my father. Brad leaned forward, resting his knuckles on the tempered glass, looking at me as if I were a stubborn child throwing a meaningless tantrum. "Come on, Naomi, do not be so dramatic," he sneered loudly. His voice dripped with condescending poison, perfectly matching the toxic energy of my parents. "The timer is ticking down. Just sign the paper and let us enjoy the party. We are going to completely gut your kitchen next month anyway, so you can go ahead and take your cheap appliances with you when you leave." The extended family shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Uncle Gary cleared his throat, looking extremely anxious. They were waiting for my inevitable emotional collapse. I maintained constant, unblinking eye contact with Brad. I let him see the cold, empty void staring back at him. I did not raise my voice or hurl a petty insult. I slowly reached my right hand directly into the open compartment of my leather briefcase. My father smiled, assuming I was finally retrieving my pen to sign away my entire net worth. I bypassed his ridiculous printed quitclaim deed entirely. I did not even acknowledge the cheap paper resting on the glass. Instead, my fingers found the crisp edge of a different legal document I had securely tucked inside a protective plastic sleeve. I pulled it out and placed it directly on top of his insulting demand. It was a formal, legally binding 30-day eviction notice printed on the official heavy stock paper of my attorney's civil litigation firm. The bold black lettering at the top of the page left zero room for misinterpretation. I retrieved a smooth black ink pen from the side pocket of my briefcase. I did not hesitate. I did not allow my hand to tremble, even a fraction of an inch. I signed my name at the bottom of the eviction notice with a bold, aggressive flourish. The sharp scratching sound of the pen tip against the heavy paper echoed loudly across the silent patio. I placed the pen down. I placed my fingertips on the edge of the formal document and smoothly slid it across the tempered glass directly toward my father. The paper stopped right over his precious quitclaim deed, completely obscuring his fraudulent demand. Richard looked down at the document. His dark eyes darted across the bold legal text. The arrogant, confident posture he had maintained for 34 years began to visibly fracture. The muscles in his jaw tightened so intensely I thought his teeth might actually shatter. "You have exactly 30 days to vacate my guest house," I said smoothly, keeping my vocal tone perfectly level and chillingly calm. The words dropped like a massive heavy boulder into a completely still pond. The shockwave rippled instantly across the faces of my 20 relatives. Aunt Susan gasped loudly, dropping her plastic cup onto the concrete. The sound of spilling ice seemed deafening. My mother Brenda pushed her way to the front of the table, her bright floral blouse completely at odds with her horrified expression. "What are you talking about, Naomi?" she shrieked, her voice pitching upward in pure panic. "You cannot do this! We are your family! Where are we supposed to go?" My father slammed his large fist down onto the glass table, rattling the silver tongs. "You insolent, ungrateful brat!" he roared, his face turning a deep, violent shade of crimson. "I am your father. I demand you tear this up right now. I will ruin you. I will ensure every single person in this city knows exactly how selfish and cruel you truly are." He thought his loud, booming voice could still control the narrative. He thought he could still utilize fear and intimidation to force my submission. He had no idea that the eviction notice was merely the opening jab in a brutal 15-round fight. The true devastating knockout blow was still waiting safely encrypted on my hard drive. I looked at his red, angry face and felt nothing but profound, absolute pity. He was a common corporate thief standing on the edge of a massive federal cliff, loudly threatening the very person holding his parachute. "I am not doing this to be cruel, Richard," I replied, deliberately using his first name to completely sever the parental dynamic. "I am doing this because you are an active financial liability, and I no longer tolerate criminals residing on my property." The word criminals hung in the heavy air, freezing the entire crowd in place. The silence became completely absolute. If you want to know exactly how I systematically exposed their massive federal wire fraud and illegal gambling debts to the entire Anderson family while they stood in my backyard, please take a moment to subscribe to Morning Revenge. Your engagement truly helps me deliver the rest of this devastating story. My father stared at the formal eviction notice resting on the glass table. The heavy word criminals hung in the humid air like a toxic cloud. The dark skin of his face slowly transformed into a violent shade of purple. The thick veins bulging against the collar of his pressed blue shirt looked ready to completely rupture. He had spent his entire adult life building an impenetrable fortress of authority. He demanded absolute respect from every single relative standing in my backyard. Hearing his obedient scapegoat daughter openly label him a criminal in front of his precious captive audience short-circuited his brain. He leaned heavily over the table. His eyes were wide and filled with a terrifying, unhinged fury. "You would not dare!" he hissed. His voice was a low, dangerous growl that sounded like a feral animal backed into a corner. He raised his large hand as if he intended to physically strike me right there on the concrete patio. He never got the chance to unleash his physical rage. Exactly on schedule, the sharp melodic chime of my front doorbell echoed through the quiet house. I had coordinated this precise timing down to the very last second. Evelyn Ross did not wait for my mother to offer a polite invitation. I had left the front door completely unlocked for her. I heard the sharp, authoritative click of her expensive designer heels marching aggressively across my hardwood floors. The heavy sliding glass doors pushed open with a loud scrape. Evelyn stepped out onto the sunlit patio, radiating a level of absolute frigid authority that immediately paralyzed the entire barbecue. She wore a tailored charcoal gray suit that looked incredibly sharp and completely out of place amidst the casual summer dresses and cheap polo shirts. She possessed the intimidating aura of a highly seasoned executioner, arriving to finish a very important job. The 20 relatives instinctively parted, forming a wide, clear path for her. Evelyn did not offer a friendly greeting or apologize for interrupting the party. She walked directly toward the glass patio table. She carried a thick, heavy stack of manila folders tucked under her left arm. She raised the files and slammed them down directly on top of the ridiculous quitclaim deed my father had tried to force me to sign. The loud, violent smack of heavy paper hitting the tempered glass caused several aunts to physically jump backward. "I am retained legal counsel for Naomi Anderson," Evelyn announced. Her voice was incredibly smooth, but it carried a lethal cutting edge that demanded absolute silence. I am here today to officially serve Richard and Brenda Anderson with formal notice of a massive civil lawsuit. We are filing charges for severe financial fraud, aggravated identity theft, and malicious extortion. The entire backyard descended into a state of absolute frozen shock. Uncle Gary stopped chewing his food, letting his plastic fork drop onto his paper plate. The children who had been running and screaming near the wooden fence suddenly stopped playing, sensing the massive shift in the atmosphere. My mother, Brenda, looked as if all the blood had been instantly drained from her body. Her artificial tan seemed to turn a sickly shade of gray beneath the bright summer sun. She grabbed the metal edge of a folding chair, swaying slightly on her feet as if she might collapse onto the concrete. "This is a ridiculous mistake," she stammered weakly, looking around at her siblings for any sign of support or intervention. Evelyn completely ignored her pathetic denial. She opened the top manila folder and began extracting the devastating forensic evidence with practiced, methodical precision. She pulled out the high-resolution copies of the forged bank documents, placing them firmly on the table. She laid the official forensic handwriting analysis directly on the glass for everyone to see, pointing out the obvious jagged discrepancies in the signature. She explained exactly how Richard Anderson had walked into a local credit union 5 years ago, utilizing his country club connections. She detailed the corrupt arrangement he made with a desperate insider. She exposed the $75,000 home equity line of credit stolen directly from the starter home I had worked so incredibly hard to secure. Evelyn did not stop there. She traced the stolen money for the captive audience. She explained how the massive loan bypassed my personal accounts entirely. She described the fake shell company registered under Brenda's maiden name. Then Evelyn turned her piercing gaze directly toward my sister Jessica. She told the entire stunned family that my stolen equity paid for the exotic floral arrangements, the exclusive country club venue, and the expensive catering at Jessica's lavish wedding ceremony. She announced that my father literally mortgaged my future to buy his golden child her perfect fake fairy tale. Aunt Carol is my father's oldest sister and the most vocal gossip in the entire Anderson family. She had always trusted her brother implicitly, believing his arrogant stories about his brilliant financial investments. She stood frozen near the buffet table, holding a paper plate loaded with potato salad. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal finally registered in her mind. The paper plate slipped from her trembling fingers. It hit the concrete patio with a loud, wet splat, sending baked beans splattering across her white canvas shoes. She ignored the mess completely. She took a step toward the table, staring at her brother in pure, unadulterated horror. "You actually forged your own daughter's signature to steal her money?" she demanded loudly. Her voice broke on the last word, echoing the profound disgust felt by every single relative present. My father panicked. The invincible golden patriarch was rapidly crumbling into a pathetic, desperate, cornered rat right in front of his entire extended family. Heavy beads of sweat poured down his forehead, soaking the stiff collar of his expensive blue shirt. He looked frantically at his judgmental sisters and brothers, realizing his entire pristine reputation was evaporating into thin air. He could see the awe and respect in their eyes being rapidly replaced by pure disgust. He decided to double down on his toxic manipulation, relying on the same old lies that had protected him for decades. He lied through his teeth, attempting to salvage his crumbling authority. "I possess full legal power of attorney over her finances," he shouted frantically, pointing a shaking, accusing finger directly at me. "She was struggling during that period, and I was simply managing our combined family assets during a complex transition." This is just a massive misunderstanding blown completely out of proportion by a vindictive, ungrateful child who wants to ruin a beautiful family celebration. Evelyn did not even blink at his loud, aggressive outburst. She did not flinch away from his pointing finger. She stepped closer to him, invading his physical space until he was forced to lean backward. "No, you do not have power of attorney," she stated flatly, her voice slicing through his pathetic excuse like a surgical blade. "You never held any legal authority over her accounts. Furthermore, forging federal bank documents and conspiring with a corrupt loan officer named Marcus Trent is classified as severe federal wire fraud. We have the complete wire transfer logs linking your fake company directly to his illicit gambling associates." Evelyn paused, letting the name Marcus Trent sink into his panicked brain. She watched the absolute terror flood his dark eyes as he realized we knew every single dirty secret. "This evidence is not just for a civil lawsuit," she continued, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register. "This entire forensic dossier was submitted directly to the Nebraska Attorney General yesterday morning. State investigators are already reviewing your financial history, Richard. You are not facing a family misunderstanding. You are facing imminent federal indictment and mandatory prison time." The arrogant smugness vanished entirely from the faces of Jessica and Brad. The golden child suddenly realized her entire perfect life was constructed on a rotting foundation of felony theft. She clutched her pregnant belly, looking at her father as if he were a complete, terrifying stranger. Her beautiful, flawless wedding memories were now permanently stained with criminal deception and financial ruin. She realized every single compliment she ever received about her expensive floral arrangements or her exclusive venue was actually a direct insult to the sister she had spent years tormenting. Beside her, Brad took a slow, trembling step backward. His cocky, entitled smirk was completely gone, replaced by sheer, absolute terror. He realized that if a ruthless corporate attorney was digging deeply into the corrupt loan officer Marcus Trent, they were only one single step away from uncovering his own massive offshore gambling debts. The family patriarch was completely exposed as a desperate criminal, but the radioactive legal fallout was just beginning to spread across the patio. Before I explain exactly how Brad foolishly attempted to intervene and ended up accidentally exposing his own massive financial ruin to the entire family, please take a quick second to subscribe to Morning Revenge. Drop a comment below and let me know how you would handle a toxic father stealing your hard-earned equity. Your engagement helps me continue exposing these incredible stories of justice. Brad decided he needed to regain control of the narrative before the legal spotlight swung in his direction. He stepped forward, trying to play the tough, protective husband. He puffed out his chest and pointed aggressively at Evelyn. He thought he could bully a senior litigation partner the same way he bullied his subservient wife. He had absolutely no idea he was stepping directly onto a massive hidden landmine that was about to blow his entirely fake, wealthy persona into a million tiny, unrecoverable pieces. Brad opened his mouth to shout a defensive threat at Evelyn, but the words completely died in his throat. He looked at the thick manila folders and realized his own massive financial secrets were likely hidden inside those pristine legal files. He swallowed hard, taking another large step backward until his shoulder hit the brick retaining wall. He completely abandoned my father to face the legal slaughter alone. The entire patio descended into a chaotic murmur of panicked whispers. Uncle Gary and Aunt Carol were actively backing away from my parents, treating them like they carried a highly contagious disease. The impenetrable fortress of the Anderson family hierarchy was collapsing into dust right in front of my eyes. My mother, Brenda, possessed a deeply ingrained survival instinct. She was not a mastermind of corporate finance like her corrupt husband, but she was an absolute genius at emotional manipulation. Throughout my entire childhood, whenever a creditor called the house or a teacher demanded a conference about Jessica's terrible grades, Brenda would conveniently develop a sudden severe medical crisis. She used mysterious migraines and sudden dizzy spells as a get-out-of-jail-free card to completely avoid basic adult accountability. She sensed the extended family was rapidly turning against them today. She saw the intense disgust painted across the faces of her own siblings. She knew they were rapidly losing the public narrative. So she resorted to her ultimate manipulative tactic. Brenda let out a loud, dramatic gasp that sounded like a dying wail. She placed her right hand directly over her chest, clutching the fabric of her bright floral blouse tightly in her manicured fingers. Her knees miraculously buckled at the exact right angle, allowing her to collapse safely and perfectly into a cushioned wicker patio chair. "Oh, my heart!" she wailed, her voice trembling with artificial agony. "Richard, my heart is giving out. The stress is literally killing me." She threw her head back against the cushion, closing her eyes and taking rapid, shallow breaths. She expected the entire yard to instantly forget the massive felony fraud allegations. She expected Aunt Carol to rush forward with a glass of cold water. Most importantly, she expected me, the eternally dutiful and thoroughly conditioned daughter, to drop the eviction notice, fall completely to my knees, and beg for her forgiveness. She anticipated my immediate surrender to her medical emergency. 5 years ago, I would have panicked. I would have abandoned my own boundaries to ensure her comfort. But the woman standing on the patio today was a seasoned forensic accountant who had spent the last 14 days tracing her mother's fake shell companies. I looked down at her pathetic theatrical performance and felt absolutely zero empathy. My heart remained as cold and hard as a glacial lake. I did not rush to her side. I calmly reached into the pocket of my dark linen trousers and retrieved my smartphone. I kept my eyes locked on her flushed face as I slowly and deliberately dialed the emergency dispatcher. The digital keypad beeped loudly in the quiet yard. I pressed the phone to my ear. "Yes, I need an ambulance dispatched to my address immediately," I stated clearly, keeping my vocal tone completely flat and professional. "My mother is currently experiencing a severe panic attack on my back patio because she was just served with massive felony fraud papers and a formal eviction notice." The sheer, brutal honesty of my statement echoed across the manicured lawn. The relatives who had taken a hesitant step toward Brenda instantly froze in their tracks. Hearing the words felony fraud spoken directly to a 911 dispatcher shattered any remaining illusion of a simple family disagreement. Brenda miraculously caught her breath the very second she realized I was actually bringing emergency medical personnel to the scene. Real paramedics would instantly expose her fake heart attack by checking her perfectly normal vital signs. Her eyes snapped open, completely devoid of any pain or suffering. She glared at me with sheer, unadulterated venom. The sudden, miraculous recovery was so shockingly fast, it actually caused Uncle Gary to laugh nervously out loud. "Cancel that call right now, Naomi," she snapped, sitting up perfectly straight in the wicker chair and smoothing her wrinkled floral blouse. "I do not need an expensive ambulance. I just need a single minute to catch my breath in the shade." I did not lower the phone. I smiled at her. It was a cold, calculating smile that promised absolute destruction. "No, Mom," I replied smoothly, my voice carrying clearly over the gentle summer breeze. "I think it is highly imperative that the trained paramedics check your vitals thoroughly before the police arrive." The specific word police dropped onto the patio like a live grenade. The fresh wave of absolute terror that washed over my parents' faces was truly exquisite to witness. Jessica let out a sharp squeal of panic, finally dropping her stolen spare keys onto the concrete. The shiny brass hit the hard ground with a loud metallic clatter that sounded like a prison door locking shut. Brad physically flinched, grabbing his own hair in sheer panic. My father completely lost whatever fragile grip he had left on his sanity. The patriarch who had controlled our entire lives through fear and intimidation was now facing the terrifying reality of his own imminent arrest. He let out a primal scream of pure rage. He lowered his head like a charging bull and took a massive, aggressive step directly toward me. His large fists were clenched so tightly his knuckles turned completely white. "I am never leaving this property, you miserable, ungrateful wretch," he roared, his face a mask of violent fury. "I will destroy everything you have ever built." He intended to physically assault me right there in front of the entire extended family, but he never made it past the tempered glass table. I had spent my entire life anticipating his explosive temper. I knew that cornering a narcissist would eventually trigger a violent physical response. That is exactly why I had arranged for a formal civil standby earlier that morning. From around the side gate of my wooden privacy fence, 2 large, uniformed Omaha police officers stepped directly into the backyard. Their heavy black boots crunched loudly against the gravel pathway. They wore dark navy tactical uniforms, their heavy utility belts loaded with equipment shining brightly in the afternoon sun. I had shown them the formal 30-day eviction notice and the massive federal fraud files an hour before the party began. They knew exactly what kind of volatile situation they were walking into. The older officer stepped rapidly in front of me, creating a solid, impenetrable physical barrier between my body and my violently unhinged father. The officer placed his hand, resting casually but purposefully, on the heavy black grip of his duty weapon. "Sir, you need to step back and vacate these premises immediately," the officer commanded. His voice was not loud, but it carried the undeniable heavy weight of actual institutional authority. It was a stark contrast to my father's hollow, arrogant bluster. The transformation was absolutely instantaneous and incredibly satisfying to observe. The tough guy persona that Richard Anderson had aggressively cultivated for decades evaporated in a single microsecond. The threatening corporate predator instantly shrank into a cowardly, pathetic old man. His broad shoulders slumped forward. The violent crimson color drained completely from his face, leaving him looking sickly and pale. He immediately raised both of his hands into the air in a posture of total, complete surrender. He took 3 rapid steps backward, away from the armed officer, practically tripping over the legs of a folding chair. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer some smooth, manipulative lie, but his voice completely failed him. He just stood there, shaking uncontrollably, while the entire Anderson family watched his ultimate, pathetic defeat. If you are thoroughly enjoying seeing this corrupt family finally face the severe legal consequences of their terrible actions, please take a quick moment to subscribe to the Morning Revenge channel and hit the like button. Your continuous support allows me to share these incredible stories of sweet vindication. The younger police officer turned toward my mother, who was still sitting frozen in the wicker chair. "Ma'am, you have exactly 5 minutes to gather your personal belongings and exit this property," he stated firmly. "If anyone attempts to re-enter this residence after today, you will be formally arrested for criminal trespassing." The barbecue ambush had completely failed. They thought they could use public humiliation to force me out of my own home. Instead, they were being publicly evicted and humiliated by armed law enforcement in front of every single person they sought to impress. But the absolute best part of my entire master plan was yet to come. Because while my parents were being escorted off the premises, Jessica and Brad were about to realize they had nowhere left to hide. I slowly turned my attention toward my panicked sister, ready to deliver her specific, personalized consequences. The 2 armed law enforcement officers did not gently suggest compliance. They physically corralled my parents toward the side wooden gate like stray, dangerous animals. The humid afternoon air felt thick with the heavy scent of burning charcoal and complete social destruction. I followed them, slowly stepping off the concrete patio onto the soft green grass of my backyard. The entire extended family scrambled behind me, a chaotic herd of frightened, silent witnesses. Uncle Gary refused to even make eye contact with his brother. Aunt Carol kept her head down, clutching her ruined canvas shoes. The march down my paved driveway felt like a monumental historical procession. My mother Brenda stumbled over the curb, her floral blouse stained with nervous sweat, her previous fake medical emergency forgotten in the face of actual legal authority. The suburban street was usually quiet on a Saturday. However, the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruiser parked near the mailbox had drawn significant neighborhood attention. Mrs. Gable from across the street stood on her porch holding a watering can, staring openly at the unfolding drama. Mr. Henderson paused his lawnmower, resting his hands on the handles, to watch the mighty Anderson patriarch being forcibly removed from a residence. This public display constituted the ultimate nightmare for a man obsessed with maintaining false appearances. Richard Anderson spent his entire adult existence cultivating the pristine image of a wealthy, successful corporate executive. As the regional vice president of development for Apex Construction, he demanded respect from everyone he encountered. He wore custom-tailored Italian suits, drove a leased luxury sedan, and bought expensive imported cigars just to hand them out at the local country club. His entire identity relied firmly on projecting an aura of untouchable financial superiority. He viewed my quiet, diligent career as a certified public accountant with profound disdain. He frequently mocked my modest lifestyle, calling my chosen profession incredibly dull and unworthy of his grand legacy. He believed a real business person closed massive real estate deals over expensive steak dinners, instead of sitting behind a dual-monitor setup, analyzing complicated tax spreadsheets. Now that very same arrogant executive stood humiliated on the hot asphalt of the public sidewalk. The younger officer pointed a stern warning finger, instructing him to remain off the private property. Richard realized his familial dictatorship was permanently dismantled. His siblings were fleeing to their vehicles, desperate to distance themselves from his toxic radioactive presence. Finding himself stripped of his parental authority, he frantically reached for the only weapon he had left, his extensive professional network. He turned around facing me as I stood safely elevated on my shaded front porch. His face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. A trembling index finger extended in my direction, shaking violently with desperate rage. "I know every major business owner in the greater Omaha area," he screamed, his voice cracking under the intense emotional strain. "I will personally call every single client you have on your roster. I will tell them you are a fraudulent, malicious thief who attacks her own blood relatives. I will ruin your pathetic little accounting firm." The threat echoed loudly, bouncing off the brick facades of the surrounding houses. He genuinely believed he possessed the necessary power to destroy my livelihood. He thought his country club connections could easily crush my small independent enterprise. Standing on that porch, looking down at the man who had tormented me for decades, I experienced a sudden, overwhelming sensation. I could not contain the physical reaction bubbling up inside my chest. I threw my head back and laughed out loud. It was not a hysterical, nervous chuckle. It was a deep, genuine laugh born from the profound, intense, dramatic irony of his pathetic ultimatum. The sound confused him deeply. He lowered his pointing finger, narrowing his dark eyes in sheer bewilderment. He expected me to cower, beg, or negotiate to save my professional reputation. He never anticipated genuine amusement. "Go ahead and make those phone calls, Dad," I called back, keeping my vocal tone cheerful and terrifyingly calm. "Call all of your wealthy friends, but you forgot one incredibly critical detail when you decided to underestimate my boring career." I paused, letting the heavy silence amplify the impending destruction. The police officers stood by, watching the exchange with detached professional curiosity. Jessica and Brad huddled near the trunk of their parked car, looking like terrified lost children. "Apex Construction is my firm's largest corporate client," I announced smoothly. The words struck him with the blunt physical force of a speeding freight train. His jaw went slack. The angry red color draining rapidly from his cheeks left his skin a pale, sickly gray. He blinked rapidly, trying to process the lethal information I had just delivered. He had spent years ignoring my actual professional achievements, never bothering to ask who hired my services or how my business actually operated. His narcissistic blindness had finally led him directly into a fatal trap. I did not let him recover. I leaned against the sturdy wooden railing of my porch, delivering the final, devastating blow. "I was personally conducting their mandatory quarterly audit last week." I continued, speaking slowly to ensure he absorbed every single syllable. "Your chief executive officer specifically requested my firm because we possess a pristine reputation for forensic accuracy. During that detailed review, I found the hidden offshore shadow accounts. I traced the unauthorized wire transfers. I found the exact $120,000 you systematically embezzled from their operating budget over the past 3 years to fund your fake, luxurious lifestyle." The silence on the street became absolute. The rustling wind blowing through the oak trees seemed to stop. Even the distant sound of neighborhood traffic vanished. My father tried to speak, but only a dry rasp escaped his throat. He looked like a man who had just watched his own executioner pull the lever. "I did not stop there," I said, my voice dropping to a serious, lethal register. "I did not just report your massive theft to your boss. As a licensed professional, I am legally obligated to report severe tax discrepancies. I submitted the entire financial dossier directly to the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division yesterday afternoon. You cannot ruin my business, Dad, because by tomorrow morning, you will not even have a job. You will be facing severe federal embezzlement charges, and your country club friends will pretend they never even knew your name." The structural integrity of his entire fake universe collapsed instantly. The psychological devastation was so profoundly overwhelming, it manifested physically. His knees literally gave out beneath his weight. He did not stumble or try to catch his balance. He simply dropped like a heavy stone. He sat down hard on the rough concrete curb right next to a dirty storm drain. He raised his shaking hands and buried his pale face into his palms, utterly destroyed. The mighty patriarch was reduced to a weeping, crumpled mess on the side of a public road. His bespoke suit gathered dust from the gutter. The illusion of his power was permanently shattered, leaving nothing but a hollow, desperate criminal waiting for the inevitable arrival of federal agents. Seeing the architect of my childhood misery reduced to tears on the asphalt provided a deep, satisfying sense of closure. However, the battlefield was not entirely cleared yet. My sister Jessica watched her father's monumental collapse with wide, terrified eyes. She had anchored her entire delusional existence to his financial support. Without his embezzled money paying for her expensive nursery furniture and her lavish vacations, her pristine suburban fantasy was disintegrating rapidly. She realized that the golden safety net she relied upon her entire life was actually woven from stolen threads. Brad stood frozen beside her, his mouth hanging open like a caught fish. He understood the severe implications of my audit immediately. If I had meticulously investigated Apex Construction and uncovered his father's intricate shadow accounts, I undoubtedly possessed the skills to dismantle his own pathetic financial house of cards. The massive offshore gambling debts he desperately tried to conceal were no longer safely hidden. He stared at me, standing confidently on the porch, realizing I held the absolute power to ruin him next. The Omaha police officers, sensing the confrontation had reached a natural conclusion, instructed my parents to get into their vehicle. My mother, Brenda, wept silently, opening the passenger door of their leased luxury sedan with trembling fingers. She did not offer a single word of defense or apology. She simply slid into the leather seat, recognizing that her era of lazy, comfortable manipulation was officially terminated. This incredible victory was meticulously planned, but the story is far from over. If you are captivated by this intense journey of exposing toxic family members, please take a moment to subscribe to Morning Revenge. Your support is crucial for the channel and helps bring these dramatic stories to life. Drop a comment sharing your thoughts on this confrontation. As the silver sedan slowly drove away down the suburban street, carrying my defeated parents toward their inevitable federal indictment, I turned my unwavering gaze toward the final two targets remaining on my property. Jessica and Brad were still standing near the curb, stranded without their primary benefactors. They thought the worst was over. They assumed my vengeance was fully satisfied by taking down the family patriarch. They were horribly mistaken. The true personalized destruction of their fake marriage was just beginning. The silver luxury sedan disappeared around the corner, carrying my defeated parents toward their inevitable federal indictment. The flashing lights of the police cruiser faded into the distance. The heavy Midwestern humidity settled back over the manicured lawns, wrapping the neighborhood in a stifling blanket of heat. The chaotic energy of the barbecue had completely evaporated, leaving behind a profound, heavy silence. Jessica and Brad remained stranded on the very edge of my property, near the concrete curb. They looked exactly like survivors of a massive shipwreck, clinging desperately to jagged rocks while the ocean swallowed their pristine vessel. For 30 years, my sister operated on a highly specific and deeply ingrained survival mechanism. Whenever the severe consequences of her terrible decisions approached, she instantly located a human shield. She routinely sacrificed friendships, romantic partners, and her own sister just to maintain her flawless artificial bubble. Watching our parents' empire collapse in real time triggered her ultimate self-preservation protocol. She realized the golden safety net she relied upon her entire life was permanently shredded. Jessica looked down at her trembling hands. The shiny brass spare keys she had secretly stolen and duplicated suddenly looked highly radioactive. She opened her manicured fingers and let the metal fall. The keys hit the soft green grass without making a single sound. Her arrogant, victorious smirk was entirely erased, replaced by a mask of sheer, unadulterated panic. Doing exactly what the Golden Child always does, she scrambled to save herself by instantly turning on the rest of the family. She began to cry. These were not silent, dignified tears. They were loud, hysterical, gasping sobs, specifically designed to extract maximum sympathy from any available audience. She stumbled frantically across the lawn, marching directly toward my wooden porch. Her expensive white maternity dress fluttered slightly in the warm summer breeze. She looked exactly like a fragile, terrified angel, desperately begging for salvation. "Naomi, please," she wailed, her voice cracking with perfect theatrical precision. I had absolutely no idea about the forged home equity line of credit. Dad lied to me. He swore his brilliant stock investments paid for the wedding. Please let me stay in the guest house. I will file for divorce from Brad tomorrow morning. I am a victim here too. I stood elevated on my front porch, staring down at her tear-stained face. 5 years ago, that specific, pathetic performance would have commanded my immediate, unconditional surrender. I would have opened my heavy oak doors and allowed her to completely drain my remaining resources. But the grueling forensic audit had permanently cured my emotional blindness. The terrified little girl who craved her older sister's approval was dead. I felt nothing but profound, freezing disgust. "You are not a victim, Jess," I stated sharply. My voice cut through her theatrical sobbing like a heavy steel blade. I did not raise my tone, but the absolute certainty in my words stopped her forward momentum instantly. Evelyn did not just locate the fraudulent bank documents. I continued relentlessly. We tracked the specific encrypted wire transfers. That stolen $75,000 did not simply vanish into thin air to pay phantom catering companies. The funds went directly into your primary joint checking account at the local credit union. I watched her green eyes widen in pure, undeniable terror. She opened her mouth to formulate another pathetic excuse, but I refused to let her speak. "You actively chose to ignore the ugly truth I declared, my words raining down like heavy stones. You proudly signed the dealership paperwork for that brand new white Range Rover parked in my driveway, using funds stolen directly from my starter home equity. You intentionally built your entire lavish suburban fantasy on top of my financial corpse. You knew exactly what you were doing." Before she could process the total destruction of her victim narrative, I shifted my gaze toward her husband. Brad stood completely paralyzed near the asphalt driveway. His expensive designer aviator sunglasses hid his eyes, but I could clearly see a thick bead of cold, nervous sweat rolling down his sharp jawline. He was a coward, desperately attempting to blend into the brick retaining wall. Brad spent his entire marriage pretending to be a highly successful, independent day trader. He wore custom-tailored suits and spoke loudly about complex cryptocurrency portfolios during our tense family dinners. In reality, his trading accounts were completely empty. He was a degenerate sports gambler chasing massive, impossible parlays to cover his rapidly mounting losses. He used his arrogant persona to mask a pathetic, crippling addiction. "And Brad does not want this house so he can build a beautiful custom nursery," I announced loudly, ensuring every single neighbor still watching from their front porches heard the exact devastating truth. "He wants to leverage the remaining equity to save his own miserable life." Jessica stopped crying entirely. Her tears evaporated in a fraction of a second. She whipped her head around, staring at her husband in absolute, unadulterated horror. "He owes exactly $40,000 to a very dangerous offshore bookie," I explained smoothly, leaning forward against the wooden railing. "A violent man who operates a massive illegal gambling ring right here in Omaha. And here is the truly fascinating detail, Jess. That specific criminal bookie is the exact same corrupt public notary who officially stamped our father's fake loan documents. They utilized the exact same underground network. The united front they had carefully constructed to terrorize me imploded in a single blinding flash. The pristine illusion of their perfect marriage shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces, scattering across my front lawn. Jessica suddenly realized she was legally bound to a desperate, indebted fraud who planned to mortgage her child's future to appease violent criminals. Brad simultaneously realized his pregnant wife had just eagerly offered to divorce him to save her own skin. The silence stretching between them felt incredibly violent. The thick, humid air cracked with absolute betrayal. If you are captivated by this intense unraveling of a highly toxic family dynamic, please take a quick second to subscribe to the Morning Revenge channel. Drop a comment below and tell me if you think Jessica deserves any mercy after actively spending the stolen funds. Your engagement truly helps me expose these incredible stories of sweet vindication. Jessica marched aggressively toward Brad. She did not resemble a fragile, helpless angel anymore. her face twisted into a grotesque mask of pure, concentrated hatred. Her hands curled into tight fists. She closed the physical distance between them, stopping inches from his chest. "You pathetic, lying loser," she screamed, her voice echoing loudly down the quiet suburban street. "You told me you were managing massive corporate portfolios. You told me we were rich. You were going to let dangerous criminals take my beautiful home." She raised her right hand and slapped him directly across his cheek. The sharp cracking sound of flesh hitting flesh echoed sharply across the yard. His expensive aviator sunglasses flew off his face, hitting the hard asphalt and shattering completely. Brad did not apologize. He did not cower the way he did when the armed police officers arrived. He grabbed her thin wrist, his own mask of polite civility totally destroyed. He looked down at the woman he vowed to fiercely protect and sneered with pure malice. "You hypocritical, greedy parasite," he spat, his voice dripping with concentrated venom. "You spent $10,000 of that stolen cash on luxury designer clothes in a single month, while I begged you to review our monthly budget. You saw the massive incoming wire transfers, you knew exactly where the money came from, and you did not care, as long as you looked wealthy for your pathetic country club friends." They stood in the middle of my manicured lawn, violently tearing each other apart. Two hungry parasites brutally turning on each other the moment their primary host finally walked away. I watched their perfect, fraudulent marriage burn straight to the ground, feeling an incredible, overwhelming sense of profound peace. They were so deeply consumed by their mutual hatred and financial ruin, they failed to notice the final, fatal consequence approaching rapidly in the distance. My meticulous master plan was nearly complete, and the absolute final, devastating blow was already in motion. Jessica and Brad stood in the center of my manicured front lawn, violently tearing their fraudulent marriage apart. Their loud, vicious accusations echoed down the quiet suburban street, entertaining the remaining neighbors who lingered on their shaded concrete porches. They were so entirely consumed by their mutual hatred and impending financial ruin, they completely failed to notice Evelyn Ross stepping gracefully off my wooden porch. Evelyn did not walk with a hurried, anxious pace. She moved with the deliberate, terrifying calmness of a seasoned apex predator approaching a trapped, exhausted meal. She held one final crisp white document in her right hand. It was secured inside a thick, transparent plastic sleeve, shielding the heavy legal paper from the suffocating Midwestern summer humidity. She walked directly past the shattered plastic remains of Brad's expensive aviator sunglasses resting on the hot black asphalt. She did not raise her voice or attempt to interrupt their pathetic screaming match. She simply extended her arm and shoved the heavy plastic sleeve directly against Jessica's chest, forcing my sister to instinctively grab the document to keep it from falling onto the grass. Jessica stopped screaming instantly. The violent red flush of anger drained completely from her cheeks. She looked down at the bold black lettering stamped aggressively across the top of the crisp white page. Her green eyes widened in absolute, unadulterated terror. Brad leaned forward, reading the dense legal text over her trembling shoulder, his own face turning a sickly shade of gray. "This is a formal, temporary restraining order," Evelyn announced flawlessly, her smooth voice slicing through the heavy summer air like a freshly sharpened surgical blade. It was officially granted and physically signed by a district judge early this morning. We presented the massive forensic evidence of severe financial abuse, and the judge did not hesitate for a single second to approve our immediate request. Jessica opened her mouth, but absolutely no sound emerged. Her vocal cords were completely paralyzed. She simply stared at the judge's signature at the bottom of the page, realizing her entire toxic safety net was now entirely illegal. "If you, your corrupt gambling husband, or your federal criminal parents come within exactly 500 feet of Naomi or this physical property, you will be arrested immediately and booked into the county jail," Evelyn continued, ensuring every single neighbor heard the specific legal boundary. "You have exactly 30 days to move your personal belongings out of the guest house. However, you are strictly legally forbidden from stepping foot on this property to retrieve them. All moving logistics must be strictly coordinated through my downtown law office using licensed third-party movers. If you attempt to contact my client via phone, email, text message, or any other digital platform, the police will be immediately dispatched to your location to execute a formal arrest warrant." The absolute finality of the legal boundary dropped onto the front lawn like a massive heavy boulder. Jessica and Brad were completely and utterly neutralized. They possessed zero financial resources, zero parental protection, and absolutely zero legal recourse. They were permanently stranded on the hot asphalt, surrounded by disgusted, silent neighbors, realizing their entire fraudulent, wealthy existence was permanently over. I did not walk down the concrete stairs to offer a final dramatic speech. I did not hurl a petty insult or demand a pathetic apology. I simply turned my back on the pathetic, smoldering wreckage of my toxic family. I walked across the smooth wooden planks of my front porch and stepped inside my quiet, beautiful sanctuary. I pushed the heavy, solid oak door closed behind me and reached out to grasp the cold brass deadbolt. The loud metallic click of the lock sliding firmly into place was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard in my entire 34 years of existence. It sounded like pure, unadulterated freedom. The suffocating, heavy psychological weight I had carried since childhood instantly evaporated from my shoulders. The constant crushing anxiety of anticipating my father's explosive, aggressive anger or my mother's fake theatrical medical emergencies was completely eradicated. I stood alone in my pristine, quiet foyer, breathing the cool, conditioned air, feeling an overwhelming, profound sense of absolute, lasting peace. The grueling psychological war was officially over, and I was the sole victorious survivor standing in the fortress I built with my own 2 hands. Fast forward exactly 6 months, and the harsh Midwestern summer slowly transitioned into a freezing, brutal winter. The legal and financial fallout from that fateful sunny afternoon was incredibly devastating and completely absolute in its destruction. My father, Richard Anderson, never recovered his arrogant corporate persona. The massive forensic dossier I submitted directly to the Internal Revenue Service triggered a massive joint federal investigation. Federal agents formally raided the downtown corporate offices of Apex Construction, executing a highly public search warrant. The company immediately terminated his executive employment, permanently stripping him of his lucrative 6-figure salary, his luxury company vehicle, and his prestigious country club membership. He currently sits inside a small, cold concrete holding cell, awaiting his mandatory federal trial for severe corporate embezzlement and aggravated wire fraud. The terrifying man who once demanded absolute, unquestioning respect from everyone he encountered is now a pathetic, disgraced inmate facing a minimum of 10 to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. My mother, Brenda, was completely exposed as a highly willing and active accomplice. Her fake offshore shell companies were systematically dismantled by aggressive state prosecutors. She lost her expensive leased luxury sedan, and her massive suburban home was seized to pay back the stolen corporate funds. She currently rents a tiny, depressing one-bedroom apartment on the industrial outskirts of Omaha, entirely shunned by the extended Anderson family. Aunt Carol and Uncle Gary completely cut all communication, refusing to associate with convicted thieves who steal from their own children. Brenda's mysterious medical emergencies no longer summon eager, sympathetic audiences. She is completely alone, forced to finally face the miserable, isolated reality she actively helped construct. The precious golden child and her fraudulent husband faced an equally satisfying absolute destruction. Jessica and Brad filed for a highly bitter, incredibly toxic divorce mere weeks after the restraining order was formally issued. The massive offshore gambling debts completely consumed whatever small remaining assets they managed to cleverly conceal. They were forced to declare total, devastating Chapter 7 bankruptcy, standing in front of a federal judge with absolutely nothing left. Jessica lost her shiny white Range Rover and her expensive designer maternity wardrobe. She moved into a cramped studio apartment, forced to work a grueling minimum-wage retail job just to survive. Brad completely vanished into thin air, fleeing the state of Nebraska entirely to avoid the violent regional bookies who realized his corrupt father-in-law could no longer cover his massive illicit debts. Their pristine fake marriage imploded perfectly, leaving nothing behind but bitter regret and permanent financial ruin. As for my own life, the sheer permanent removal of their toxic parasitic energy created an incredible massive vacuum of positive forward momentum. Without my parents constantly draining my emotional reserves and attempting to steal my hard-earned equity, my professional forensic accounting firm absolutely exploded with new, highly lucrative clients. My total annual revenue increased by a massive 30% in a single financial quarter. The prominent local business owners my father foolishly threatened to call actually ended up hiring my firm directly, recognizing my pristine, undeniable reputation for ruthless forensic accuracy and complete legal integrity. I hired 3 new brilliant junior accountants and completely expanded my commercial downtown office space to accommodate the massive influx of corporate contracts. But the absolute most important and fulfilling victory was not merely financial or professional, it was deeply personal and highly restorative. I utilized the remaining recovered equity from the guest house property to officially launch a local, comprehensive financial literacy foundation specifically designed for abused and financially manipulated women. We provide free forensic accounting services, strict legal guidance, and professional career coaching to desperate victims trying to permanently escape toxic domestic environments. I sit across a polished wooden table from terrified, exhausted women every single week and teach them exactly how to trace stolen funds and build their own impenetrable financial fortresses. I teach them how to systematically transform from obedient, terrified victims into lethal, confident executioners of their own brilliant destiny. I show them exactly how to reclaim their stolen financial power and secure their permanent independence. My toxic, abusive family heavily relied on the powerful, deeply ingrained illusion of endless biological obligation to keep me permanently trapped in a vicious cycle of financial abuse. They genuinely believed that blood relation gave them infinite, unlimited permission to steal my resources, drain my bank accounts, and destroy my mental health without ever facing a single consequence. They banked heavily on my silence and my deeply conditioned fear of intense public humiliation. But radical, unapologetic legal boundaries ultimately set me entirely free. If you have ever been forced to completely cut off a toxic, manipulative family member to save your own future and permanently protect your hard-earned peace, please drop a massive yes in the comments section below. Do not ever let anyone convince you that enduring severe financial or emotional abuse is simply a mandatory requirement of being part of a family. You owe them absolutely nothing. Thank you so much for following this incredible, grueling journey of absolute justice and permanent vindication. Please do not forget to subscribe to the Morning Revenge channel for more intense, highly satisfying stories about exposing ruthless narcissists and finally taking your absolute power back from those who try to destroy you. Always remember to fiercely protect your peace, build your impenetrable sanctuary, and never hesitate for a single second to drop the heavy legal hammer on anyone who tries to steal your brilliant future. The American family is often painted as a pristine sanctuary, a white picket fortress where children are nurtured and guided toward a prosperous future. We are taught that blood is an unbreakable bond. The traditional family structure is supposed to be a safety net, where honesty, fairness, and unconditional love form our moral compass. But what happens when the architects of that sanctuary systematically tear it down? What happens when those tasked with guiding us into adulthood use our loyalty as a weapon, exploiting the very trust they were meant to foster? The story of Naomi Anderson serves as a chilling cautionary tale about the dark underbelly of parental responsibility. It forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth: raising children requires far more than providing a roof and the outward appearance of suburban success. True parenting demands emotional awareness, an unwavering commitment to absolute fairness, and the courage to instill genuine accountability. When these core values are abandoned, the family unit devolves from a safe haven into a psychological battleground, leaving scars that can take a lifetime to heal. Richard and Brenda Anderson completely abandoned these critical tenets. Blinded by the intoxicating allure of false prestige, they warped the beautiful concept of family responsibility into a grotesque mechanism for financial abuse. Instead of teaching their children the value of honest labor, they modeled deception and entitlement. Instead of fostering mutual respect, they cultivated a toxic hierarchy based on favoritism and insatiable greed. They demanded blind obedience while offering absolutely zero protection, entirely violating the sacred social contract that is supposed to exist between parent and child. The most devastating failure of the Anderson household was the complete lack of fairness in how they nurtured their two daughters. We witnessed the destructive dynamic of the golden child and the scapegoat play out with catastrophic consequences. Jessica, the golden child, was actively shielded from every consequence her mistakes paved over with stolen money. She was taught she was inherently deserving of luxury, but pampering a child is not protecting them. By refusing to let Jessica face the reality of her choices, by forging a home equity line of credit to fund her lavish lifestyle, her parents severely crippled her. They left her completely defenseless against the real world, anchoring her to a degenerate gambler and a mountain of illicit debt. When the illusion finally shattered, Jessica had no resilience, moral compass, or true independence. Her parents' deeply skewed version of love was the ultimate betrayal of their duty to prepare her for adulthood. On the opposite end of the spectrum was Naomi, the designated scapegoat. She was expected to carry the heavy, unacknowledged emotional and financial burdens of the entire family. Her boundaries were trampled, and her professional achievements were belittled. The traditional expectation that children should respect and support their aging parents was aggressively weaponized to drain her resources. Yet the profound irony of this toxic dynamic is that this mistreatment forged Naomi into an unbreakable force. While her parents were busy building a fragile house of cards out of corporate embezzlement, Naomi was painstakingly laying a foundation of unyielding stone. She learned the harsh value of complete self-reliance because the people who were supposed to catch her were actively trying to push her down. This intense narrative begs us to look deeply at how we guide the next generation. Long-term guidance for children in American culture simply cannot be rooted in the preservation of superficial optics or keeping up with the neighbors. If we genuinely want our children to thrive, we must introduce them to the uncomfortable but necessary virtues of honesty and integrity. We must teach them that true success is not measured by the luxury logo on your car or the size of your patio, but by the quiet, unshakable dignity of a life lived truthfully. We have a profound responsibility to foster deep emotional awareness in our homes, creating a stable environment where a child's fundamental worth is never tied to their financial utility to a parent's delusions. When we strip away the dramatic confrontations and the flashing lights of police cruisers, the core lesson of Naomi's journey is about the sacred duty of guardianship. Parents are supposed to be the ultimate stewards of a child's trust. When a mother dramatically fakes a heart attack to manipulate her daughter's empathy, or a father screams threats of professional ruin in the street, they are committing a spiritual crime against their own blood. They are aggressively teaching their children that love is purely transactional and inherently unsafe. It is a terrifying distortion of traditional family values that forces a child to choose between their own mental survival and the very people who brought them into the world. If you found yourself nodding along to Naomi's quiet, lethal victory, or if you have ever had to build an impenetrable fortress to protect yourself from the very people who were supposed to protect you, you are absolutely not alone in this fight. This is exactly why we must tell these stories. We must expose the hidden shadows to finally bring in the light. If this story resonates with you, be sure to follow the channel Morning Revenge. Your continued support ensures that these vital, intense conversations continue reminding us all that we possess the ultimate power to rewrite our own narratives and reclaim our stolen peace from those who try to destroy it. Let us remember that true family responsibility sometimes requires making the hardest, most painful choice of all, walking away entirely. It means recognizing that you cannot heal a toxic dynamic by allowing it to consume your hard-earned stability. As you reflect on the smoldering ashes of the Anderson family empire, take a moment to consider the foundations you are actively laying in your own life. We all carry the heavy echoes of our upbringing, but are the expectations you carry genuinely your own, or simply unearned debts passed down by someone else's greedy hands? Eventually, the loud summer barbecue ends. The toxic guests go home, the thick smoke clears, and the distracting noise fades into nothingness. You are left standing in the quiet of your own home, staring at the closed front door. And in that heavy silence, you must ask yourself, is the structure you've built truly a sanctuary, Or is it just waiting for the truth to finally knock